One, there was absolutely nothing in this world he could not master. He possessed an exceptional talent for swordsmanship, and nothing could escape his blade. He trained day and night, working until his hands were covered in bloody calluses. After graduating from high school, he spent 20 years honing his knife skills, becoming the best knife master in the entire country. Every single table in the restaurant was packed. And no surprise there, because the chef at this place was simply legendary. The chefs worked with complete focus when suddenly a strange sound rang. They all turned toward a rather unusual noise. It was the head chef's phone ringing, but he was so incredibly focused on his work that he barely noticed. When he finally reached for the screen, the man noticed a bizarre notification. It was a message from a mobile game he had recently deleted. He figured it was just some weird software glitch, but right at that moment, a staff member hurried in to announce that an unexpected guest had arrived. Kim told them to say he was busy. Too late, unwanted visitors entered the kitchen. They joked that the chef still had not learned how to lie properly. These guys were local gangsters. They wanted an answer and demanded to know what Mr. Kim had decided. The thugs claimed they had given him plenty of time to think, since for a man who uses knives daily, the request was actually quite simple. The leader laughed, saying he had almost forgotten his manners. He needed to prove his sincerity immediately, showing his respect in full. He wanted to make sure the talented chef would not be disappointed. A metal suitcase slid onto the table. It was a massive down payment of 300 million won, with even more promised after the job. The chef listened quietly to the offer, slowly turning his favorite sushi knife. In his hand, he looked up and coldly noted that cleanliness was the #1 rule here, and there was absolutely no room for filthy people like them. He told the thugs to get out of his kitchen. The boss chuckled, saying the master chef was wasted slicing fish in a cheap joint like this. He deserved a much more decent stage. But before the thug says another word, watch closely, the chef wields his flashing blade. The cold steel gleamed. Spooked, the intruders scrambled toward the exit, but the leader spat a threat, promising he would be back very soon. With that final warning delivered, the gangsters finally cleared out of the kitchen. The assistant was in absolute shock. He could never imagine turning down that money. But Kim said he only knew how to cut fish, not how to be a criminal. The assistant argued that with his legendary reputation, he wouldn't actually have to hurt anyone. He could just scare them and buy a brand new restaurant. But Kim firmly refused to take such a shady path, rejecting the dangerous offer. Right at that moment, his phone buzzed again with another strange set of notifications. It mentioned that game, Divine Defense. The young worker went back to cleaning. The chef was completely baffled, since he had deleted that app days ago. Left alone, the chef began reflecting on his life. He had turned to cooking after going totally bankrupt, and now he was desperately struggling to survive. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket buzzed like crazy, absolutely refusing to stop. It was getting incredibly annoying, and he figured the device was just glitched. He had reinstalled the game while drunk the night before, but he knew he still had to delete it and forget the whole thing. These gacha demons had invaded his life for far too long, and our chef decided this game had no place in his life anymore. But right before he hit delete, his favorite heroine popped up on the screen as a nostalgic melody began to play. He had not logged in for a long time, yet the soundtrack still charmed him, and the gorgeous female characters were as stunning as ever. He was just holding his phone when suddenly space warped. The ground began to tremble violently. Shortly after, a kitchen assistant walked out to the restaurant backyard, searching for the missing chef, but the yard was completely empty, with nothing but a phone lying on the ground. It made absolutely no sense where he had vanished to, or why he left his cell phone behind. The coworker figured the chef had simply stepped away to the restroom. It was just a shame that he was slacking off during work hours. Meanwhile, the screen was still flickering, and a notification finally popped up stating that the transfer had been successfully completed. Honestly, there was not much to say about this generic game, just a basic cash grab with standard autoplay mechanics and constant paywalls, a typical mass-market title that needed no explanation for why people would download it. He had installed it purely for the breathtaking artwork of the gorgeous ladies. The game had completely hooked our protagonist. The real irony was that he spent a fortune on microtransactions and cleared multiple extra playthroughs, yet now he was neither a playable hero nor a prominent side character. He was a Nobody completely lost in the background, unrecognized, and that was incredibly infuriating. Now, he was just a teenage boy named Kangja, who was about to enter the subway when the doors slid open and a girl stepped out. She quickly apologized for not paying attention, and the two went their separate ways. Kangja began to analyze this strange version of the game world carefully. Fortunately, the setting was still based in Korea, and most street names and station layouts perfectly matched. This made it much easier for him to adapt pretty quickly, plus being a teenager again meant he could escape all the heavy burdens and responsibilities of adult life. Fast forward, and a whole year had already passed. Living this new life made him completely forget whether he was in a video game or actual reality. Honestly, this was the peaceful life our hero never got to experience back in the real world until that fateful day arrived, returning home. He was greeted with joyful cheers. Apparently, Kangja was a great of the sword and the absolute pride of the family. His parents eagerly showed him a letter they had received from the Wacken Academy, inviting Kangja to come and study. His parents were overjoyed to have raised such an outstanding son, and they were so incredibly proud that they planned to show off this acceptance letter to everyone. It turned out the official ceremony was scheduled for the very next day, meaning their beloved son had to quickly pack up all of his belongings, just like that. His dream of a quiet, peaceful life was shattered, just like that. But seeing his parents so happy, he simply could not refuse them. Kangja had tried multiple times to tell them that he had no interest in attending, but absolutely nobody would listen to him. He looked around his bedroom with a heavy heart, knowing he had to leave it behind. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto a framed photograph. Staring at himself, he couldn't grasp how such a clueless guy got into this elite school. But as it turns out, the whole situation had played out rather strangely. See, his parents recently reminded him of a massive event from the previous year. The boy had suddenly unlocked divine power, which got Kang Jonah immediately accepted. He realized his character, Kang Jonah, was supposedly some kind of prodigy. He apparently wielded rare divine power and got into the academy on his first try. This divine power is a highly unique ability that certain people can use. It acts quite a bit like active skills in a typical fantasy game. Naturally, different individuals unlock completely different skills, but not everyone gets one. For the most part, this supernatural force is passed down directly through genetics. It all depends on whether your parents actually possess any divine power themselves. Because of this, their society is strictly split into noble, middle, and poor classes. The prestigious Wacken Academy was built specifically to keep the elite class in power. On paper, the school was designed to raise legendary heroes. In reality, it quickly became a playground for the children of wealthy families. But quite recently, they introduced a unique loophole for non-hero families. They set up a special admission system for normal folks without heroic bloodlines. Kang Jonah somehow got in as one of these rare scholarship students. You might wonder why they even need heroes in the first place. Well, that is all thanks to the looming threat of the Demon King and his monstrous hordes. Only heroes can defeat them, though Kang Jonah knew this was basically a game. Still, he had to attend this academy to train for actual, brutal warfare. It felt just like mandatory military service. Flopping onto his bed, he sighed. He started analyzing his active divine power, which turned out to be painlessness. This skill drastically reduces incoming physical pain. Suddenly, a glowing blue status window popped up. He could check his available stats and active abilities at any given moment. Right now, he only had 30 seconds of pain immunity. Pretty weird, honestly. How Kang Jonah enrolled in an elite academy with such a basic skill was baffling. He recalled how this power shifted when he first took over this body. Kang Jonah quickly realized he actually possessed a hidden blessing from the sword god. This meant any opponent he attacked would instantly suffer extra deep cuts. It was a highly unusual ability that he had never encountered in game before. Its incredibly grand name stood in hilarious contrast to its extremely basic effect. Seriously, what does dealing extra cut damage even mean in practice? The description was totally absurd, but the actual activation requirements were even funnier. To activate it, his sword had to be under 30 centimeters long. It also had to be under 5 centimeters wide, hardly a sword at all. Honestly, those are the dimensions of a standard, everyday kitchen knife. Was the game telling Kang Jonah that he was destined to prep raw fish? Transmigrating into a fantasy world just to slice raw fish felt like bad karma. His new life was definitely not going according to plan. He sat down, thinking. He carefully reviewed what he needed to pack for his big journey tomorrow. Right on cue, he realized he hadn't even bought any weapons yet. Kang Jonah quickly started researching the best starter gear for his build. Sadly, even the lowest tier weapons cost tens of millions of won. They cost hundreds of millions of won, plus the tuition fees were absolutely insane. Naturally, he had no interest in spending money on something he was forced into. The letter clearly demanded that all students bring their combat weapons. But Geomas simply refused to bring any expensive gear. He figured he would make a terrible impression on his very first day. Honestly, he didn't even care about that. Instead, he took a casual walk to a local store. Suddenly, he remembered his old master, who always insisted on using a Japanese sashimi knife worth over 100 million won. Geomad didn't even know why he was suddenly thinking about that stubborn old man. Of course, they say a true master never blames his tools. Soon, the long-awaited day of the Academy's grand entrance ceremony arrived, starting with a strict equipment inspection. Geomas simply brought a bunch of cheap knives he bought on sale at a supermarket. Who actually brings cheap kitchen cutlery to a high-stakes combat exam? This madman does. Everyone thought he was just joking around, but the instructor definitely wasn't having it today. He was fully prepared for the usual pranks that high school graduates pull every year, which meant it was absolutely necessary to put them in their place right from the start. The teacher did exactly that, demanding to know where the boy thought he was. Did Geomath think this prestigious school was an academy or some circus, showing up with kitchen tools? How could he bring a basic kitchen knife to a prestigious entrance exam? But Geomath simply replied that this was indeed his chosen weapon, looking entirely relaxed. His calm composure infuriated the furious instructor. He began yelling at the boy, but Geomath calmly explained his special admission status. Coming from an incredibly poor background, the high academy tuition alone was an overwhelming burden. He simply couldn't bring himself to ask his parents for some expensive fantasy weapon. The instructor checked the student ID card, realizing the kid was telling the truth. He really was a low-income scholar, but why was this prestigious school so heavily biased? Against less fortunate applicants, Geomal looked straight at the proud teacher. He boldly declared that a public educational institution should always promote equal rights for everyone. He also pointed out a much more important lesson about being a warrior. Geomab believed that only a complete amateur would ever mock someone else's weapon. A true master never blames his tools. Hearing those words, the instructor froze. These definitely were not the simple words of an ordinary teenager. Kang Geomas sounded like an experienced expert who had already reached the absolute peak of his craft. He was eloquent, sharp, and the instructor realized this kid was a tough nut to crack. Standing before him was a teenager with an unyielding spirit and a razor-sharp tongue. As a veteran teacher, he knew finding such unique talent was incredibly rare. Guiding a rare student like this would be a major honor. It was genuinely exciting. The instructor stood straight, pressed his hands to his sides, and made his decision. He loudly announced that Cadet Kang Geoma's cheap sashimi knives were officially approved. The wealthy students standing in line stared at Geoma with pure hostility. They couldn't understand how a poor peasant had ended up at their highly elite academy. The instructor immediately overheard their nasty whispers and stepped in. He put an instant stop to the chatter, reminding them of the rules. Once the initial equipment inspection was completely over, everyone had to clear the training hall. He warned them that he could be a gentle lamb or their absolute worst nightmare. Though he was cleared, Kang Geoma wasn't exactly thrilled about all this attention. He knew right then that the other students would absolutely despise him. Inspections dragged on, wasting half the day. All Geoma wanted was to relax, so he collapsed onto a courtyard bench. He totally saw this coming, but the pressure still weighed heavily on him. At least his gear was officially checked. Now the only obstacle left was passing the upcoming class entrance exam. But looking around, Geomas still couldn't believe he had actually made it in. He was stuck here for years. This legendary training ground for elite heroes, the famous Hakken Academy. He had imagined a massive school building, but this place was different. It was basically a small, sprawling town. Even a hardcore skeptic like Geoma had to admit he was impressed. Walking into a school meant strictly for the absolute top tier of society. It made him remember when poverty forced him to drop out of school. Being here now felt completely surreal. Suddenly, a loud announcement echoed over the speakers. The entrance exam was starting, and all students had to gather. He immediately packed up his things. The welcome party was over, but this test actually mattered. Gioma pulled out his cheap kitchen knife and held it up high. He had to pass no matter what. Funnily enough, he hadn't drawn this blade since entering the game world. There was no need, but he still remembered his master's strict advice. Never put the weapon down, ever. Keep it close. Gioma had clung to his knife for 20 years. Spending 20 years in reality meant his skills wouldn't fade after 1 year here. He slowly drew the blade. Holding the blade close to his ear, he gently tapped the metal. It was in perfect condition. Gioma aimed his knife at a nearby leaf, wanting to test its sharpness. Wait, look closely. A strange glow suddenly burst from his hands. A system message flashed. Activation conditions met. The legendary blessing of the sword god was finally activating, but things went wrong. But his physical stats were too low. The system warned him that his weapon level was heavily suppressed to compensate. A forced synchronization was starting. The system synchronized instantly, granting him the blessing of the sword god. It was agonizing pain. It literally felt like his body was tearing itself apart from within. A massive flash blinded him, making him wonder if he had finally died. He was suddenly floating in space. Violent arcs of blue lightning pierced directly through his entire nervous system. He had absolutely no clue what was happening as his body froze completely. The knife slipped from his paralyzed grip. Slowly, the dimensional tears around him started to heal. The worst had passed. As the warped subspace finally settled, Yoma felt the heavy distortion fade. He could finally move his limbs again, realizing he was back at the academy grounds. The strange shift occurred the exact instant he let go of his sashimi knife. His body throbbed with agony, his head pounding as if it were splitting in two. He still had no clue what had actually just happened to his body. He knew the legendary sword god's blessing had activated, but the feeling was terrifying. It felt like his entire reality was crumbling to pieces. That godlike power demanded a brutal toll, causing unimaginable agony in his physical frame. His passive skill, the blessing of painlessness, only worked on minor muscle soreness. If every single activation felt this agonizing, Yoma could never use it. Right then, the academy instructors bellowed for the cadets to gather. They needed to assemble inside the training hall immediately. Yoma stared down at his weapon. The cheap blade lay on the cold ground, waiting to be retrieved. But the memory of that excruciating pain made him hesitate to touch it. He tried to convince himself that the first backlash was always the worst. Besides, he could not just abandon his trusty kitchen knife on the floor. He reached out trying to stay calm, but his fingers shook with deep dread. Grabbing it felt like a violent bolt of lightning coursed through his entire soul. He had absolutely no idea how to control this volatile, godlike power. Meanwhile, inside the Jokwon Academy Hall, eager students and wealthy parents were gathering. The snobbish adults gossiped about the astronomical tuition fees. But the chatter died down when a legendary figure stepped onto the stage. It was none other than the famous hero, Kling Siegfried, one of the elite 7-star warriors and a direct descendant of the great Eren. He trained under the school's legendary founder, Master Wen himself. Recognizing him as the ultimate powerhouse, the noisy crowd quickly took their seats. The entrance ceremony was starting, but Siegfried looked incredibly bored in his chair. He was completely sick of this repetitive routine year after year, but Sage Medea was right beside him, greeting her old friend with a warm smile. She remarked that it had been ages since they last shared a room together. Siegfried grunted in agreement, noting that 50 long years had indeed flown by. Yet Medea, the Academy's current director, still looked unbelievably stunning. She playfully chimed in that every woman wishes to preserve her beauty forever. Despite having just celebrated her 70th birthday, she radiated absolute youth. Medea teased that she could easily make Siegfried look 10 years younger with her magic. He scoffed, pointing out that she was an old woman who still acted childish. True warriors should focus on their inner spirit, not their superficial looks. Medea simply chuckled, amused that his stubborn attitude had not changed in 50 years. Deep down, however, she knew this grumpy old hero had shifted over time. He used to love attending ceremonies, but now he clearly detested being here. He hated breathing the same air as these arrogant, self-centered noble kids. Medea then asked about his granddaughter, hoping she had grown into a fine lady. But Siegfried brushed the question off, turning his sharp gaze toward the arena. The highly anticipated placement exam was officially about to commence. Down below, the arrogant elite cadets looked smugly confident. They were all fashionable and expensively dressed young elites. Kang Jianma immediately felt like a total outsider in this crowd. He did not have anyone to speak with, even a single word with. Looking around at the crowd, Kang Jianma realized he was practically the only student here with dark hair, and on top of that, a special scholarship kid surrounded by wealthy nobles. Kang Jianma remembered how the other students mocked him during the weapons check, completely unable to comprehend how such a ragged outcast had ended up among them. Young man still remembered their nasty remarks about the stench of poverty. But then he saw something extraordinary. Kang Jianma was completely speechless, although he remained completely silent, his active mind going totally blank. He and the other students watched this living miracle pass by with sheer envy. But Kang Jianma remained calm and waited in absolute silence, knowing exactly who was approaching. It was Abel, the legendary granddaughter of the Sword Emperor. She was the absolute most beautiful heroine in the entire game, and the reason an ordinary chef with no high education had ever noticed this world in the first place and downloaded the game. This entire training subspace had been created by the founding heroes alongside the academy itself, a separate space from human suffering. Even so, physical pain and sensations were felt in full force here, but it was physically impossible to actually die within this space. Its simulated environment had zero connection to the real world, meaning no real casualties ever occurred. These subspace battles were traditional, but this year, completely different. The instructors decided to change the format to a massive battle royale. All students were split into teams of 10, evaluated solely on survival. This simple academy test had suddenly transformed into a brutal survival game. What a massive twist. To make things worse, there were no equipment restrictions. Siegfried immediately complained that without limits, the rich kids would dominate. Principal Medea admitted she had to make a massive compromise. Like it or not, the entire academy relied on funding from these rich families. To establish this training system, Medea had been forced to endure endless humiliation. Meanwhile, Kang Jianma was staring at Abel in sheer awe. He once thought she was just a fictional character. But now he actually felt sorry for the desperate fools trying to get close to her, though. Honestly, he probably would have done the exact same thing in their shoes. Kang Jianma had played enough of this game to know her secret. Abel was a character holding a divine blessing, tightly bound to the actual protagonist of the game. Makes sense, the protagonist always gets the girl. Besides, a gorgeous girl like her would always attract top-tier talent. A complete outcast like Kang Jianma simply did not belong in their elite circle. At all, he had zero desire to get involved in academy politics or messy school drama. Long ago, Kang Jianma had established 3 golden rules for his future: peace, order, and safety. Graduate without any trouble, get a normal job, and live a peaceful life. But according to his guide, the most sought-after career was a highly paid hero. Kang Jianma shuddered as he remembered the toll his body took when he first gripped that sashimi knife. The sheer agony of it still made him incredibly nervous. Forget about saving the world, let someone else do it. He just wanted a comfortable, quiet little job for himself. Suddenly, the loudspeakers crackled to life, announcing the start of the class exam and explaining the rules. First up was a major twist. This year, they were doing a battle royale. Random groups of cadets would face off. The top survivor takes the prestigious star class, while second and third place get into the dragon class. Everyone else lands in the ordinary regular classes. Everything is riding on how they perform in this brutal battle royale. System points accumulate automatically, with no time limits whatsoever. Kang Jianma decided not to waste a single second and just get this tedious exam over with. He desperately wanted to fail upward straight into a normal, regular class. The high-tech subspace generator hummed to life, and the exam officially began. Instantaneously, the students were warped into a strange, unfamiliar pocket dimension. They were immediately divided into subgroups, while instructors wished them the best. May the strongest and most worthy survive, they said. Kang Jianma figured. Would be better if he did not even try to draw his sashimi knife. The exam was coming to a close. Another group finished their battle royale in the Ranks flashed instantly. It clearly had been a brutal, relentless trial. For the cadets, almost every student stumbling out of the subspace looked completely exhausted. Medea tried to comfort her old friend Siegfried, who was stressing over his granddaughter, but with her spectacular pedigree, her performance was guaranteed to be amazing. Every match was recorded, allowing them to review specific parts on the screens. It became obvious that a Buin Nibelung possessed absolutely exceptional speed. Medea happily noted Siegfried's granddaughter was incredibly impressive, although her grandfather's old record remained untouched. She still secured a legendary spot in the Academy's top 10 rankings. Siegfried found nothing shocking about that, given their proud family bloodline. Believing the show was over, Siegfried prepared to leave the observation deck early. There was still one final group left in the battle royale, though. But the old master did not care anymore. He bid farewell to Medea and headed out to attend to some private business. Suddenly, every student nearby froze as a strange, overwhelming pressure made them stare at the screen. Sensing the anomaly, Siegfried rushed back to his seat. He and the director immediately realized something absolutely unprecedented was happening. The entire campus shook violently. Medea and Siegfried watched the screens with deep concern, holding their breath for what would happen next. Suddenly, a blinding flash lit up the sky, forcing Medea and Siegfried to look up. Oh, watch closely. The sky literally begins to crack and crumble to pieces. Cosmic fragments crumbled and rained down onto the training field right before them. Shockingly, the students were tumbling out alongside the broken shards of space. It was unbelievable. The kids had literally fallen right out of subspace. Meanwhile, the massive tear in the sky remained open, emitting a brilliant white light. One more student crashed onto the ground as a sharp knife stabbed into the pavement. Medea immediately ordered the medical team to rush out and check on them. The chaotic dust began to settle, but the final results were already predetermined. Kang Jiama ended up in a grouped with deadly rivals, true death defiers. He had to fight no matter what. Luck was rarely on his side. His opponents could easily see that most of the students were too weak, especially against the evil twins from the brutal Iron King family. Mao Jun knocked out several students, declaring they were far too pathetic. Mao Shun also quickly destroyed any students who actually showed some talent. No limits, Kangjma saw right away that their cruelty was unmatched. They were deliberately slaughtering everyone in sight. Kangjma noticed nobody was paying him attention. He looked so weak to his enemies that they simply ignored him. No wasted time on him. Soon, the bored twins scattered everyone else. They began wandering the battlefield, casually counting the bodies they had just broken. Remorseless monsters. Imagine feeling absolutely nothing after doing something like that. Nearby, a battered student begged for his life, crying out in immense pain. But his pathetic begging only annoyed the twins, who wanted to finish everyone quickly. Almost over, it looked like nearly every cadet on the floor was already finished. The brothers had even started a sick competition to see who could kill more. Mao Jun grinned, telling his brother he saved a girl just for him. Mao Shun happily agreed to handle the girl left standing in the hall. Standing all alone in the hall, Kangjma watched, horrified by the scene. He could not just stand by, so he stepped out to confront them. The girl had been sitting quietly in the corner this entire time. She was lost in a complete daze, having absolutely no intention of fighting back. Mao Shun began mocking her, saying she was definitely his type. But he was far more interested in hearing her scream in absolute agony. Mao Jun was absolutely thrilled, loving how sick his brother was. Mao Shun just stood there, sticking out his disgusting tongue in anticipation. He was already planning how he would tear her body to bloody pieces. But before he could start, a voice suddenly called them total bastards. Kangjma told them that even in a simulated subspace, they went too far. He called them absolute psychopaths, though he knew he was in deep trouble. Big mistake. Talk about picking the worst possible moment to play the hero. They had not even realized there was still another cadet left standing. Their first instinct was to check his name tag to see his identity. Seeing the name, they realized he was a special student. They grinned wildly. Mao Shun promised to deal with him quickly, but Mao Jun had other plans, advising his brother to rip out his tongue for insulting them. Kangjma tensed up, knowing things were about to get incredibly dangerous. Doubts flooded his mind. He did not know if he should use his blessing of painlessness, but then he remembered how they treated the others. They had been torturing people for 30 minutes. 30 seconds of safety was completely useless here. Kangjima realized he had absolutely no other choice left. He had to use the sashimi knife, even if it triggered his blessing. It was a powerful blessing, granted directly by the god of the sword. But Kangjima remembered the terrifying reaction he always had when touching a blade. Besides, just hours ago, he had resolved to live a normal, safe life. He wanted a regular class, far away from all this violent chaos. So much for his peaceful principles. It looked like those rules were made to be broken. The twin brothers watched the student with absolute amusement as Jioma opened his bag to pull out a sashimi knife they initially expected. Some legendary, terrifying weapon to emerge from the bag, but seeing a mere kitchen blade made them burst into laughter. Mao Shun quickly stopped laughing, warning he would inflict the absolute maximum amount of pain for running his mouth. Planning to crush Jioma's skull first, Mao Shun leaped high in the air, preparing to crush him from above. Jioma stood firm with the sashimi knife in hand. Focused and waiting, the young man knew he had to play his cards right. He decided not to take any chances, even if his safety net was temporary. With only seconds of pain relief, he decided to activate the skill anyway. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, and his blessing of painlessness was successfully triggered. Completely suppressing any sense of pain, Jioma also activated the blessing of the sword god, using his painlessness to completely neutralize the brutal backlashing pain that followed. Mao Shun remained convinced the boy was harmless. While holding that pathetic kitchen knife in his hands, Mao Shun lunged forward. Raising a monstrous fist to deliver a lethal blow, Jioma knew that if he failed to land his next strike, he would die on the spot with his weapon in hand. He had only ever sliced fish in his life, never a human being. He genuinely wondered if it was actually possible to harm a person with a simple kitchen tool. Besides, why do gangsters in movies always carry sashimi knives anyway? He quickly realized he was being foolish. That was only in the movies. And Jiomao was convinced that nothing in this world would ever change him. He remembered that attacking would cause painful backlash cuts on his own body. But the massive beast was already closing in, determined to end his life. Jioma swung his sashimi knife, screaming that he would not die here. At that exact instant, the terrifying blessing of the sword god finally manifested. Mao Shun slammed onto the floor at full speed. This triggered an old memory. Years ago, when Jiomao was a young chef, he asked his master about gangster blades. Without a word, a sharp chef's knife whistled directly past his ear and slammed into the wall. The old man reminded him to call him master, curious to know why Jiomao was so interested in the criminal world. Jioma's first teacher was a genuine gangster, to leave his crew behind. He had to chop off his own hand, later opening a sashimi restaurant, to bring joy to people with his incredible skills. Still, Jiomao wondered why screen gangsters used those exact knives. The old master replied that a true professional should never ask such silly questions. A standard knife simply ruins the meat, creating a complete mess, but a sashimi knife is incredibly narrow, allowing for flawless precision in every cut, he explained. That slicing fish is easy when it lies completely flat on a table. But slicing a vertical target clean is practically impossible, Jioma assumed. The old man lacked true talent, since manga heroes always sliced vertically with absolute perfection. Now look at this. Mao Shun's giant mutated hand floated through the air, while the beast stared at his bleeding stump in total shock. Jioma stood ready to continue the fight, calmly waiting for his opponent's next move. Mao Shun screamed in pure agony, clutching his bleeding wound on the verge of collapsing. The intense pain threatened to knock him out as the villain continued to howl. He could only scream about his lost arm, exposing his pathetic, murderous nature. Even a ruthless killer couldn't bear this pain, while Kang Joma stood there calmly. Waiting for the battle to resume, Kang Joma stepped closer, terrifying his opponent. The armless villain backed away in terror, screaming at him to stay far away. He desperately wanted to live but was completely helpless, shrieking out for someone to help. Mao Shun scrambled to escape, while his older brother stood completely frozen in shock. The older twin couldn't even process the absolute disaster unfolding right before his eyes. Mao Shun rushed toward him, desperately begging for protection and a quick rescue. But salvation never came, as the sharp sashimi knife swiftly severed his head. His final words died in his throat. Suddenly, the older brother snapped out of it. He stared blankly at the pool of blood and his brother's headless remains. And just like that, the real showdown was finally about to begin. Mao Jun calmed his racing heart, remembering they were inside a subspace. Since his twin wasn't truly dead, the villain locked his gaze onto his opponent. Something felt incredibly off about this student, as if he had never killed before. Believing it was the kid's first kill, Mao Jun advanced with heavy steps. A strange, overwhelming dread washed over him, though he couldn't explain why. He tried to convince himself the kid was just lucky, but remained highly cautious. That cheap sashimi knife was dangerous, and carelessness had cost his brother dearly. Mao Jun grabbed his brother's severed gauntlet, sliding it onto his empty hand. He muttered that this brutal weapon performed best when wielded as a pair. Instantly, his protective blessings surged with an overwhelming wave of energy. His agility and physical attributes multiplied, pushing his power to its absolute limits. To secure his victory, Mao Jun unleashed all three divine blessings at once. He refused to lose to a mere brat, as his fists became impenetrable. Incredible force radiated from his body, backed by the legendary rank of blessings. Normal combatants could only dream of such power, making him feel completely invincible. No matter where the student found that knife, it wouldn't save him from this blow. Meanwhile, Kang Joma stood with his head low, taking slow, deep breaths. Mao Jun scoffed, assuming the kid was simply frozen in fear before him. He probably wet himself, thinking the helpless student was quietly murmuring a final prayer. But no god could save him now, as Mao Jun prepared to crush him. He raised his fists to smash Joma's skull, but the countdown was finished. At the very last second, Kang Joma delivered a lightning-fast counterstrike. He only managed a light scratch, but a split second later, everything changed. Innumerable blade wounds erupted across Mao Jun's body. The promised extra cuts had landed. The young man whispered a single, cryptic word as his opponent collapsed. Suddenly, a system alert announced that his painless blessing had officially run out. Pure, agonizing pain instantly pierced his body from holding the cursed weapon. The sheer intensity of the backlash overwhelmed him, forcing him to lose consciousness. He plunged deep into darkness, only to wake up after what felt like hours. The deadly subspace was gone, and he found himself resting inside a quiet room. He assumed it was a hospital, but before he could even sit up, something happened. The door creaks open. A total stranger peers inside the room. Kan Joma sits on his bed as the man suddenly yells down the hallway. The boy woke up. Kan Joma stares at the newcomer in shock. He has never met this warrior before, yet he recognizes him instantly. 50 years ago, this very man defeated the legendary Demon Legion commander. Now he stands right beside the Academy director. Siegfried is a true titan. The second of the 7-star heroes, Miss Media asks how the boy is. Feeling she is the Academy director and one of the world's sages. At first, Kan Joma has no clue what these people want, but he quickly remembers his situation. He is asked to introduce himself, so the boy nervously introduces himself as Kan Joma. Siegfried decides to get straight to the point. The legendary warrior is clearly not one for idle games. He bluntly asks what the kid did inside the void. Kan Joma freezes. The memory flashes back. None of it felt like some fake fantasy. The young man knows he was the one who did it, but he fears drawing this much attention from humanity's top brass. His mind races. How can he explain the situation to Siegfried when he barely understands it? The boy mutters that even in a subspace test, those two crossed lines. They went way too far. Now Kan Joma realizes he made a huge mistake. He used too much force and will accept any punishment. Media listens softly. She immediately scolds Siegfried for being so incredibly harsh. She sits right beside Kan Joma on the bed, telling him to ignore the grumpy hero. She reveals that Siegfried actually unblocked all his mana pathways even if he acts like a stubborn old fool. Media adds that Siegfried is actually very sweet. The hero gets highly defensive instantly, demanding she stop talking nonsense. Media giggles, knowing he is just embarrassed. And get this, while the poor kid lay completely unconscious. They watched a full video recording of his crazy subspace battle. They were completely blown away. He rushed so bravely to defend a helpless student. Media tells him he behaved like a true prince. The kind of prince every girl dreams about, and honestly, she does too. She teases that maybe someday Kan Joma will save her just as heroically. Siegfried groans, begging his old friend to act like an adult for once. Media ignores the grumbling, reassuring Kan Joma that he has nothing to Worry about the academy already uncovered proof that the Mao twins cheated. Because of their dirty tactics, those two cheaters are getting expelled. They must write their own withdrawal letters. Kanjoma feels massive relief. No more dealing with those arrogant jerks at school anymore. It is over. Media adds that she and Siegfried came to deliver this personally. On top of that, the official exam results are officially in. Kanjoma scored the absolute highest grade. They both offer sincere congratulations. He is completely stunned. He thanks them, still trying to process how this is even possible. Things went completely differently than he had planned. And honestly, he is not so sure he likes this fame. The next morning, Quiet returns to the academy, and Media relaxes. Inside her quiet office, Headmaster Media sipped her tea, deep in thought. She had run Jokwon Academy for nearly 20 years, yet this was a complete first. Nothing in her long memory prepared her for this, leaving her utterly lost. She had no idea how to react, but she absolutely hated what was happening. Both she and Siegfried had far more questions than Geoma could ever answer. Media was shocked that Geoma seemed totally clueless about his newfound fame. The decision to crown him as the top cadet came directly from the subspace. Hearing this unbiased system verdict left the academy elders absolutely furious. They could not accept a commoner boy taking the top crown over elite nobles. Yet Geoma did not care about the title or their childish noble tantrums. Siegfried watched this mysterious young talent with a very sharp interest. Media thought the Sword Saint was bitter that Geoma beat his granddaughter. But Siegfried shut that down, claiming he was not bothered by it. Doubting the subspace created by the founding hero was total stupidity. Geoma was chosen, they had to deal with it. But Siegfried had other thoughts, if the boy only had. Possessed monstrous raw physical strength, the choice would make perfect sense. No one would have objected to a naturally born powerhouse taking the crown. But this young kid had shown something else, an execution that defied logic. Every step Geoma took seemed to hold a profound, ancient martial concept. Siegfried had spent over 50 years perfecting his path as a supreme sword master. He reached the pinnacle of his art, yet he felt strangely unsettled now. When he had unblocked Geoma's meridians, he made a startling physical discovery. The boy's soft muscles had never endured a single day of hard labor. Yet an alien, overwhelming presence seemed to slumber deep inside his flesh. Siegfried felt his old, dormant competitive spirit flare to life. Age had not dulled his desire to test himself against a worthy opponent. And that burning drive grew even stronger because the boy was so young. Meanwhile, Media kept teasing him, calling Geoma quite the handsome protector. She found his fierce protectiveness over her granddaughter absolutely adorable. As she kept gushing, she playfully asked Siegfried for his own opinion. Instead of answering, he asked what they used to call girls like her. Media was fully prepared for a harsh insult from her longtime friend. She smirked, daring him to spit out whatever vulgar label he had. Girls like her, Siegfried simply had the word attention seeker in mind. Meanwhile, Geoma left the medical bay to join the low-ranking wolf class. It was the best compromise he could secure to keep a very low profile. They begged him to join the elite, but he refused at every turn. The principal found it completely baffling. The prodigy belonged in the top-tier tiger class alongside the other elites. To keep the peace, Headmaster Media promised to hide his test results. So Geoma would not be forced into the elite tiger class. Besides, if he actually joined the elite class, the greedy elders would cause chaos. His only goal was to slide by quietly in a bottom-tier class. He had zero interest in playing political power games with spoiled nobles. Not ideal, but still decent, Geoma walked into the lecture hall where the students had already gathered, dreading that everyone would stare. But they were deep in their own conversations, barely looking up. He really wanted to be completely ignored, no spotlight, just peace. He wanted zero attention, and honestly, can you even blame him? Finally, Geoma sat down in a quiet, empty seat, an absolutely perfect stroke of luck. The principal had kept quiet, absolutely blissful silence. Loners get to read books and listen to music in peace. He loved it. But then his peace shattered. A girl approached his desk. She thanked him for what he had done. Geoma blinked. She warmly explained that he had saved her life during that deadly academy exam. Geoma wondered why she was addressing him so formally, too polite. After all, they were the exact same age. Anyone would have done it, he replied. The girl strongly disagreed with him, convinced that he was a true hero. Joma knew the truth, though. He was only trying to save his own skin. No use overthinking it. He pointed out they had not officially met. Her name was K.H. Low, and she was thrilled to be his classmate. Joma rack-searched his brain. Who on earth was this girl? He had no idea. He had beaten almost the entire game and never once saw her. The main story was focused on fighting demons, so maybe she was just another minor background extra, just like him, an absolute nobody. Joma quietly asked K.H. Low to keep their exam encounter a secret. She readily agreed, but a pretty strange look crossed her delicate face. But let's be real, Joma could tell she already spilled the beans. Suddenly, the heavy door slammed open. The head professor strode in. He loudly ordered everyone to sit down immediately. No more talking. K.H. Low scurried off, quickly promising to finish their chat later on. Slamming his heavy ledger onto the desk with supreme force, the teacher glared at them. "Congratulations on your admission," he barked. "You made it. You are the elite chosen ones, carrying the founder's legacy. Be proud of that." The man introduced himself as Lee Hwanbin. He was the head instructor of the legendary Wolf class. And today, their very first session would begin with a light workout. Everyone change into athletic gear and report to the gym. One of the highly nervous students asked what this training was actually called. A ridiculously simple routine of 100 push-ups, 100 squats, 100 sit-ups, and 10 laps. Joma could not believe his ears. Why did academy students need this basic routine to become mindless soldiers? Joma approached the desk, time for an excuse. He claimed he was terribly sick, trying to dodge the workout. But Lee Hwanbin just smiled. A top cadet did not need this. This basic training would not benefit Joma at all. He belonged somewhere else. The principal had already arranged a very special permit. Joma was free to attend literally any class he wanted. The old man had completely outsmarted him. No escape. Joma wanted that advanced class, telling the instructor he was practically back to normal. He honestly believed that getting straight into training would only speed up his recovery. The instructor agreed, fully trusting that the academy's top cadet would not disappoint. Our top cadet was incredibly honest, making him a dream to work with. But on day one of actual training, Joma was already pushed to his absolute limit. He could barely breathe, while almost every other cadet seemed to be doing just fine. Now the academy's star pupil was lagging behind, dragging his feet in last place. He forced each step with pure agony until K.H. Low finally caught up with him. She looked at Joma with deep concern, asking if he was even surviving this run. Joma forced a strained smile, wheezing out that he was doing perfectly fine. When K.H. Low asked which lap he was on, Joma weakly guessed his fifth. He figured he was doing all right since she was still jogging right beside him. Maybe she was falling behind too, but her worried look said otherwise. K.H. Low was finishing her ninth lap and paused to encourage her struggling friend. She told Joma to do his absolute best, shouting that she fully believed in him. With a final wave, K.H. Low sprinted away to finish her last lap in style. Later that evening, painful groans and bitter cursing echoed through the quiet dormitory walls. It was impossible to count the endless stream of empty bottles littering Joma's room. He lay completely broken on his mattress, staring blankly at the ceiling. Joma was absolutely starving, and it had only been a single week at the academy. But of course, a completely unexpected problem was about to crash his parade. His stomach was completely empty, and the hunger was getting worse. By dinner time, Joma was literally trembling from a profound lack of food. He ran to the cafeteria, desperate for the largest, most filling plate available. But there was a massive catch. He needed special meal tickets to get food. No ticket, no meal. Joma tried to explain his situation to the kitchen staff. He desperately asked for a simple plate of pork belly and white rice. But the staff refused, demanding that he pay up front with proper tickets first. Joma scanned the official cafeteria menu and felt his stomach drop. The prices were absolutely terrifying, far beyond what he could actually afford. Realizing he was broke, Joma went back to his room to starve in peace. Surviving on nothing but tap water was pure torture, and he was absolutely furious. The ridiculous cafeteria prices felt like a total scam to his empty stomach. He could not sleep or even think straight because of the constant gnawing pain. To make matters worse, he had already blown through almost all his pocket money. Yet the hunger persisted, refusing to give his tired body a single moment of peace. Sitting in the dark, he took his very last sip of water with dread. He simply could not go on like this, literally starving to death in his dorm. Joma collapsed onto his bed with a heavy sigh, completely defeated by the pain. For days, he had been surviving solely on water, and he was hitting his limit. He cursed his past self for ever choosing to study at this awful academy. Out of nowhere, a glowing blessing window manifested right before his eyes. Joma was too hungry to care, but the system notification was actually pretty important. His physical stats had actually improved by a massive margin. As his body grew stronger, the blessing sword requirements were shifting. Would finally decrease. This news lifted Yoma's spirits a bit, and now he understood that he truly needed to find joy in even the smallest things, his reflection. And the glass proved he had not wasted his time at the academy. His body looked sharper now, lean and practically in peak condition. And, of course, he really wanted to know if the blessing from the sword god had actually cleansed his blood vessels. Maybe his body was undergoing a massive evolutionary transformation. The legendary blessing of the sword god had not yet fully manifested, but if he kept training, he might soon be able to wield a small sword quite soon. But for now, kitchen knives awaited him. Yoma was still incredibly afraid to hold a simple knife, vividly remembering the cold terror he felt during his initiation. Somehow, his hands were literally itching to hold one. Due to the blessing, he even felt proud about this new feeling. It was incredibly weird. Just then, there was a sharp knock at the door. It was weird because Yoma had zero friends and barely spoke to absolutely anyone. He cautiously opened the door a tiny crack to see who had actually arrived. Chloe was standing right there on the threshold. She immediately apologized for dropping by completely uninvited so late at night, asking if she could bother Yoma for just a second. Yoma smiled at his only friend, quickly reassured her, and invited her inside. Asking what was going on, Chloe felt incredibly awkward, but she then softly confessed that she had not seen Yoma in the academy cafeteria for an entire week, so she got worried, thinking he was actually sick, and honestly, can we blame her? Yoma tried to look calm. He claimed he just hated the food in the cafeteria, but in reality, he absolutely loved every single dish. He just could not bring himself to admit it. Chloe was totally relieved to hear that. At the very least, now she knew Yoma wasn't actually sick. Gathering up her courage, Chloe nervously suggested that if Yoma did not mind, they could easily buy some fresh ingredients and cook something truly delicious together. No sooner had she finished her sentence than Yoma was already standing at the door. He urged her to hurry since she was already on her way to buy food. Yoma was absolutely thrilled, strutting energetically ahead while humming a happy little tune, and proudly boasted that he was a master chef who would whip up dinner in no time. Chloe struggled to keep pace with him. His physical endurance had indeed massively improved. The two spent the rest of the evening hanging out in Chloe's room, sitting at the kitchen table with completely empty plates. Chloe could not help but literally lick her fingers. The food was so incredibly delicious, she had never tasted anything like it at home. Yoma was happy. He cooked everything super fast and made it unbelievably tasty, earning every single compliment for the meal. Usually, Chloe only knew how to boil fish, never imagining she would eat such incredibly gourmet cooking. Right here in her very own kitchen, Yoma asked to peek inside his friend's fridge. Unsurprisingly, it was completely packed with fresh fish since she had grown up living near the ocean as a kid, and luckily, Yoma excelled at preparing seafood. He watched in pure amazement as she took ingredients out of the fridge. Yoma counted himself extremely lucky because he could easily prepare some fresh sashimi and get a nice bit of knife practice, but the real issue was that divine blessing from the sword god was still actively messing with his mind. Just looking at kitchen knives filled. Trembling with panic, the young man cautiously asked Chloe if she had a longer knife. Slicing with a long knife was way easier since she had already seen his weapon. At the academy, Chloe paused, weighed her options, and quickly made a move. She completely surprised Joma. Standing there, she looked incredibly pleased with herself. She asked if a kitchen knife like this would suit him, holding a massive sword. Joma simply could not handle a blade like that yet. It was a real katana. His limit was still a sashimi knife, but he had to manage to prep and fillet the fish in under 30 seconds. During the blessing, he felt no pain, but Joma was still incredibly tense. Chloe felt that tension, but back in his real life, Joma was the absolute best knife master in the country. He had to pull this off, backed by the Blessing of the sword god, he pounced. It took him only 21 seconds to finish. He scaled the fish, removed the bones, and took out the guts, slicing it up. They even managed to eat everything he prepared. It was perfect. Joma thought about how wonderfully everything had turned out, plus he survived and managed to cope with the heavy sword god blessing. Chloe was absolutely thrilled. To her, it felt like she witnessed real magic, but Joma replied that he just worked part-time at a restaurant. That concept was completely foreign to her. She did not even know what working a real part-time job meant. Joma quickly told her not to feel embarrassed or apologize. After all, she was born and raised in a wealthy, noble family and never had to work a day in her life. When they had finished eating, Joma said he was incredibly pleased to cook a delicious, fresh meal for Chloe. She insisted on washing the dishes and tidying up the kitchen since her guest had cooked. Joma stood by the window, feeling absolutely wonderful after a great meal. He had finally eaten a filling dinner, and his spirits were incredibly high. He almost felt like singing, but then a sudden racket broke the peace. All peaceful thoughts instantly vanished. He watched Chloe struggle, realizing she had likely never washed a single dish in her life. Even though he was doing chores at her age, just then a breeze swept through the window, blowing a small notebook off the shelf onto the table. It flipped wide open. Joma quickly realized it was Chloe's private diary. One entry mentioned a boy who helped her during the placement exam, and how she desperately needed to repay him now. Her handwriting was incredibly beautiful. Joma knew he should immediately put the private book away. That would be the right thing to do, but the pages flipped once more. He could not help but read her entry about their very first meeting. Chloe confessed that her heart was pounding so hard she could barely speak. She was too shy to speak to her savior. Many sweet entries followed. As Joma kept reading, a massive grin spread across his face, feeling great. But after flipping a few more pages, he froze in absolute horror. Every single page was packed with intense declarations of her love for him. Joma completely lost track of time, unaware that Chloe had finished washing up. She stood right there, catching Joma red-handed as he stared down at her diary. For generations, families of monster slayers had always received incredible honor, and they desperately craved prestige just to secure their high position. Yet behind this glittering reputation lies the dark, greedy personal interest of the corrupt elite. When they grow arrogant, a true hero finally steps onto the stage. Usually, it is the Auditor Decilia family. They lurk in shadows, yet they fight for the light. Children of the family undergo brutal psychological training. They suppress all emotions, years of relentless, forced discipline. They endure tests of fortitude. Their minds are pushed to the brink. They are subjected to horrific mental trials. They learn to ignore it. No external reactions. All of this is done to forge them into perfect, heartless mercenaries. Soon, a very young girl joined their ranks, staining her hands with fresh blood. At just 15, a cold clan elder addressed her. Listen close, Chloe Decilia. Do not dare deny your killer nature. Those chilling, brutal words burned into her mind long before she even came of age. She did not just hear them, she obeyed. Relentless training warped her psyche, leaving deep, permanent scars on her heart. Nothing but absolute emptiness remained. Her personality was completely erased, leaving only hollow whispers of emotion. Soon it was time to enroll in the elite academy. There, students are placed into classes based strictly on their individual skills. Every child of the Decilia family, naturally, possesses legendary dragon class abilities. But tradition demands they hide their true power behind ordinary rankings. A strict, secret contract between the family and academy ensures their silence. A clan elder warned Chloe directly, never draw attention to yourself. Even inside this school, her family robbed Chloe of her happy youth. They stole her freedom. Chloe silently accepted this dark fate without complaining. She submitted entirely, believing that nothing in her world would ever change. She felt utterly powerless, but get this, everything suddenly flips on its head. During an exam, when she meets a mysterious boy, he steps forward instantly. Shielding Chloe with his body, he easily stops two completely arrogant brothers. Later, during a royal battle in subspace, where dying is actually impossible, Chloe faced the threat of death for the very first time. No fear. Yet something broke. She was fully prepared to calmly welcome her end. She had long since stopped resisting her dark destiny. Why bother fighting? This was how she was taught to live. This was her entire future. It was supposed to end right there, but wait, fate is never that simple. In that exact moment, Chloe believed everything would remain completely unchanged. But suddenly a brilliant warmth pierced right through her heavy, dark clouds. A strange, hot spark ignited deep inside her chest, a new sword. A weapon she could freely wield, a sword meant solely to protect. Chloe finally understood why that brave stranger had drawn his own blade. A forgotten fairy tale flashed through her mind, one she hid as a child. It was a simple story about a heroic prince marching toward danger. He bravely enters the dark castle to free a princess locked in a tower. A beautiful tale of love, where a single savior rescues everyone from despair. In her darkest hour, Chloe remembered that favorite childhood dream. Her face flushed, heart pounding wildly, a brand new, completely unknown. Feeling blossomed deep inside her. Khlo only had one theory about what was happening right there in that dreadful subspace during a brutal life or death. Struggle, she realized love had taken root within her. Now standing in the middle of the apartment, Joma had learned her deepest secret. After reading just a few pages of her private diary, Khlo, the auditor D. Sixilia was absolutely furious. She glared at him like she was about to incinerate him on the spot. Joma knew there were no words to justify himself or explain his behavior right now. He was terrified, trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. Was it the first moment they met, or when he foolishly agreed to have dinner together? The guy started babbling about how beautiful the moon looked tonight. Khlo remained completely silent. Joma realized he needed to make a quick getaway. He blurted out he had not eaten so well in a long time and thanked her. Then the young man added that he should probably head back home now and they could just meet up at the academy. Khlo slowly removed her gloves, asking if he had seen everything written in that diary. Joma tried to act like he had no idea what she meant. The diary was sitting on the table right where it had been. He weakly gestured toward it, assuming she meant that book, adding that she seemed like an incredibly diligent, highly responsible student. The young man kept rambling, but his mind was racing in sheer panic. Did Khlo have eyes in the back of her head? He just could not understand how she noticed. To make matters worse, he felt incredibly awkward under her heavy glare. In a mere split second, this girl had transformed into a totally different person. Khlo coldly warned him not to lie. Joma insisted he had not seen a thing, but her fury forced him to confess. Suddenly, a massive, razor-sharp katana glinted in her hands. Now, standing before him was no longer a sweet girl, but a lethal threat. Joma backed away slowly in absolute terror, utterly confused. Why she was taking this so far, escaping through the window, was entirely out of the question. Her apartment sat right under the roof, and jumping meant breaking both legs. Joma spotted the front door, his absolute only way out, but Khlo stood squarely blocking his path. Talk about a massive problem. He was completely cornered. It was either leap to his doom or try pushing past her toward the exit. A horribly chilling sound rang out as the massive blade clanged against the cold tiled floor. Khlo stood there, staring straight into his eyes. Joma desperately hoped she would not strike, but in that tense second, he realized Khlo was completely entranced. It was a terrifyingly familiar state, marked by wide, unblinking pupils and dull red eyes that looked completely lifeless. That is when it hit him. Khlo was a total yander. Her mood could swing from sweet to lethal in a heartbeat. Joma was almost certain she was dealing with a split personality. These girls are notoriously complex, losing their minds in a split second, and right now she had a massive reason to snap, provoked by his own foolish actions. Joma was terrified. He knew Khlo would hunt him down to the bitter end. He desperately had to find a way to protect himself from this sudden nightmare. Her pure bloodlust was somehow even worse than that of the Mount twins. Academy life was proving absolutely brutal. First, he had to survive this. Joma desperately tried to find a solution. His sashimi knife was far away. He could have grabbed a kitchen knife instead, but reaching it, impossible. If he tried to reach for it, he would lose an arm, instantly. Or maybe a leg. Right as his hope faded, he saw a tiny utility knife on the desk. It was sitting in a cheap cup, filled with pencils and pens on the desk. Khlo was already launching her attack. He had zero time left to think. Talk things out. Joma would have preferred that option, obviously. But trying to reason with a wild yander was completely out of the question. He slid the blade open. It looked incredibly small, comical even. But get this, the second his fingers touched that handle, his blessings erupted. His mental focus sharpened immediately. A terrifying aura filled the entire room. The divine protection of the sword god wrapped around him like physical armor. Right then, Khlo brought her weapon down for a lethal blow. Joma calmly looked at her. "Your hair is getting a bit too long," he whispered. He suggested she trim it. Sometime later, Khlo slowly opened her eyes. She was lying comfortably under a blanket, realizing Joma had to be nearby. Khlo sat up quickly and looked around. The young man was gone. When did he leave? She had no idea, a total blank. Her last memory was Joma staring out the window while she washed dishes. She had sneakily glanced at him, but after that, absolutely nothing. Stepping out of bed, her very first instinct was to search for her weapon. Her katana was resting against the table. Seeing it made her sigh in relief. Usually, the second a sword touched her hands, she completely lost touch with reality. Whenever she snapped out of it, her worried family would always comfort her. They told her not to worry and to embrace her mercenary blood. Staring at her sword, she realized she had almost lost control again. She felt like a complete fool. Why did she lose control? How could she lose control right when Joma was visiting? She was terrified she might have said or done something deeply weird. Nothing came to mind, but then she saw the floor. A small utility knife was lying right there. Why on earth was that on the floor? What on earth happened here? Suddenly, she touched her hair. It was definitely shorter. Was this real, or just her imagination? She realized someone had actually trimmed her locks using that tiny office blade. Most of the cut hair was swept into the trash, meaning someone had already cleaned up. It was definitely her beloved Joma, so incredibly sweet and caring. She absolutely had to write this moment down before she forgot. Khlo rushed to the table, grabbed a pen, and opened her diary. Outside, Joma was in terrible shape, leaning heavily against a tree. His stomach twisted violently. The unstoppable nausea was hitting hard. The painless blessing had finally expired, leaving him to suffer alone. Exceeding his strict limit by a mere 5 seconds had severe consequences. He bent over again, praying he would actually survive this brutal aftermath. At this rate, his entire dinner would come right back up when his stomach finally settled down. Joma slumped onto a nearby bench, trying to remember that delicious, wonderful dinner, which had been so incredibly tasty. Then everything went off course. Joma thought about Khlo and realized he had absolutely no clue who she actually was. Normally, a sword fight is meant either to end an enemy with one single strike or to quickly subdue them. But Khlo's katana targeted nothing but vital points. It seemed her blade was forged purely for killing. Joma knew if he had been ambushed there, he would have ended up completely headless, feeling his life was in immediate danger. The young man instinctively aimed a strike at the back of Khlo's head. He was incredibly lucky his knife was so short. Joma only managed to clip her hair, causing no real, lasting harm. After that, he quickly cleaned up the room so it looked as if absolutely nothing happened. No problems, right? Joma only wanted to live a peaceful, reliable, and safe life. That was turning out to be incredibly difficult. Being completely ordinary is the hardest part. That is a brutal truth. When Joma first took up this insane game of ambition, his dreams were so much bigger. After all, he was just a regular guy who reached the absolute peak of mastery using nothing but a simple sashimi knife. Giving up that simple, regular human dream was no easy step, but everyone has their own part to play. Blessing of Wonders, that was the name of this entire fantasy world, and it was the unique, overpowered blessing of the main character he had not even met yet. From what Joma could remember about the game, besides Valor, Haken's Blessing of Valor, only 2 legendary blessings actually existed in this entire world, and the ultimate mission of these powers was simple: everyone must save the entire world from the Demon King, and the game's protagonist was the Chosen Holy Champion, and even the fearsome demonic sword Belong acknowledged his power. Joma, though, could only wield sashimi knives. No explanation needed. His head was splitting, but Joma had to focus and quickly master the basics, because as soon as he entered the academy, dealing with constant, crazy situations and strange numbers made him forget his own peaceful desires. But maybe that is just destiny. No ordinary people exist here. People exist in this game, and Joma had only a very basic grasp of the main characters, plus his actual understanding of this fantasy world was still far too weak. Just over a single week had passed since classes started, meaning the Hero's blessing was about to manifest. Academy enrollment had only just finished. This meant the main story was finally about to unfold. Joma knew the general setup of the game, but he had absolutely no idea how it ended. His advantage was knowing the official plot up to around the halfway point to avoid ruining anything. He absolutely had to follow the script because messing up would cause insane, massive trouble that he would inevitably have to clean up all by himself. Joma remembered that starting in the second semester of the junior year, things would only get worse. Sensing the arrival of the legendary hero, the powerful demons and their ruthless king would unite to launch a brutal war against the academy. As time goes on, the massive gap between demons and humans would widen until an all-out world war erupted. Thus, the plot would slowly turn into a basic, cliché fantasy mobile game. As an adult, Joma wanted to experience the true joy of youth, since his past was nothing but endless work. He was crushed that all the heroes died. After all, he had grown. He got too attached to the characters, so the chef deleted the game from his phone. But now the guy was suddenly stuck inside the game world himself. This meant the brutal war against the demons was about to become his reality. He hated the idea of dying in battle, but Joma knew time was running out. With less than 3 years left, he had to face reality instead of dreaming. A peaceful life was a fantasy, even if most game storylines end happily. Sure, the main character would probably save the world, but Joma had to survive. He needed power to protect himself because living in constant fear was impossible. Joma knew he had to get strong without drawing any unwanted attention. Standing out meant being forced to fight the most dangerous high-tier demons. He absolutely wanted to avoid that, plus he had to handle his skills carefully. The sword god's blessing was risky, and Joma only wielded that sashimi knife out of necessity. The toll on his body was too intense, so he checked his stats again. His current stats were honestly impressive, but that was only half the story. He had unlocked tons of new information that needed processing and practice. There was physical power, spiritual energy, weapon rankings, and his absorption rate. All those numbers next to the categories showed his current levels. But that absorption rate caught Joma's attention more than anything else. He wanted to study it closely, but a sudden system alert blocked him. Access was completely restricted because he had not met the specific requirements. The more he tried, the more confusing it got, so Joma left it for later. Right now, simple physical training had to be his absolute priority. Getting a new weapon was essential, since Joma could not rely on temporary invincibility. That 30-second buffer would not last, so he needed regular weapons. He had to practice using gear that did not trigger his godly blessing. Luckily, next month's midterms were replaced with practical combat training. The reward for passing was the Class B blade known as the Murasame. If Joma could secure this weapon, it would easily earn him his graduation diploma. Plus, its basic stats did not trigger the sword god's blessing at all. This meant he could safely use it as his everyday primary weapon. But first, Joma had to push his body to its absolute limits. Suddenly, the breathtakingly beautiful Abel Vonalong appeared right in front of him. She coldly told him this was her spot since she came here every night. She wanted some peace and quiet, but noticed Joma was not reacting at all. So she told him rather harshly to move over, snapping him back to reality. Joma realized he looked like a complete fool, just staring at her blankly. But seeing her up close completely froze his brain, though she quickly reassured him. She was not kicking him out, she just wanted him to make some space. Calling a public bench her spot was pretty funny, but Joma did not argue. Besides, Joma knew getting romantically involved with Abel Vonalong would make his life incredibly complicated. He had to avoid a romantic subplot at all costs to survive. Even though she was stunning, she had probably just finished an intense workout. She was slightly out of breath, which only made her look even more gorgeous. Joma was literally on the verge of drooling, completely lost in the moment. Meanwhile, she calmly pointed out that this bench had the absolute best starry view. Joma found himself in a wild situation. Sitting right next to him was the Sword Saint's granddaughter, Siegfried, the legendary Sword Saint. Even worse, she was incredibly hard to approach. Suddenly, Abel turned, asking what weapon he used since he seemed to be a swordsman. It turned out her famous grandfather had actually mentioned Joma to her before. She knew this guy was surprisingly capable and wanted to hear his professional opinion. Abel held out her weapon, asking him to take a good look and evaluate its overall quality. The girl excitedly showed off her massive blade with pride. She even offered to let him hold it, but Joma did not move a single muscle. He knew that massive sword was way too heavy for him to lift comfortably. Her pride was hurt. Watching her closely, Joma realized she was totally different now. This girl was nothing like the Abel he knew from his gaming days. Out of nowhere, she muttered that she felt he already knew her, terrifying him. Clearly, she suspected him, but then again, Abel was incredibly famous. As the most popular girl in the entire academy, everyone recognized her. Abel admitted she was indeed well known, but pointed out she had never seen Joma before. It felt a bit sketchy. He knew everything about her, while she knew absolutely nothing about him. Joma quickly tried to explain that he simply did not usually give his name to strangers. Let's be real, his excuse was weak, and she probably thought he was a spy. Perhaps he was an undercover agent for the Demon King, sneaking into the academy. After all, wandering around completely alone in the dark looked highly suspicious for any student. Either he was a dangerous spy, or he needed to explain his presence immediately. Suspicion hung heavy between them as they locked eyes. Joma shot back, pointing out that she was also wandering around completely alone at this hour. So maybe she was the actual spy here. Abel immediately argued her reasons were obvious. Her training was a clear and obvious excuse, while his presence remained a total mystery. Joma replied that he was also training, practicing a highly advanced breathing technique. This explanation actually satisfied her, and she decided to let the matter drop. But as she relaxed, Joma noticed her hands. They were completely covered in fresh wounds. Clearly, she was pushing herself to the limit, and she did not deny it. Regular people had absolutely no idea what it actually meant to carry her family name. Carrying the heavy Nebulaeon name meant Abel had to be absolutely perfect in everything. If she showed any weakness, people would instantly pounce. Like hungry dogs, especially since she just lost her top spot. Dethroned during the recent entrance exam, she left Joma sitting in tense silence. Abel admitted this was the very first time she had shared these heavy thoughts with anyone. Strangely, she felt a mix of quiet relief and intense, burning curiosity about her rival. Her main goal was identifying the mysterious student who had actually defeated her. Planning to completely crush them next time, her extreme intensity shocked Joma. To him, it was just a simple exam. The other student was just doing their best. But Abel fiercely replied that this was a matter of ultimate pride. Begging her grandfather for details did not help since he refused to speak. The old man only revealed the top scorer was from a different class. Even worse, the mysterious stranger had skipped the official oath ceremony entirely. Abel sighed, wondering why she was pouring her heart out to a random stranger. Joma sat quietly, trying to process why she was revealing all this to him. She guessed Joma was too weak. Her family lived by a strict rule. Be tough against the powerful, but show gentle kindness to everyone else. Her classmates were incredibly boring. Because of that, she had zero friends. The girl stretched. It was late, so Joma wished her a good night. He finally understood. That explained why she had seemed so distant before. Before walking away, Abel stopped to ask for his name one last time. But Joma chose silence. That was just how life went at the academy. Surprisingly, ordinary student life was far more peaceful than he had anticipated. Khlo quickly made friends and fit right in. Everyone seemed to love her. All this time, Joma actively avoided her. He refused to look her way. Whenever they did lock eyes, her new protective friends threw him icy glares. He did not care. Those arrogant, judgmental looks meant absolutely nothing to him. He held a special pass. Besides, he was not the only elite student. A few others shared his status, but they all kept their distance. They refused to socialize. It was almost certainly a matter of stubborn pride. Thinking it over, Joma was honestly glad he was not highborn elite. Recent events proved why. Right now, a highly tense political phase had begun. The elite star and dragon classes were actively forming rival political factions. Even during the game, Joma thought those factions were full of utter clowns. If he were stuck there today, the drama would probably make him sick. Still, life had its perks. Joma had finally started eating decent meals. He even loved planning his daily menu. Then, the academy director arrived. The director presented him with a special card for the top-ranked student. It was a faculty pass. To keep a powerful card like that, Joma would have gladly bowed to the director 3 times a day. Instead, he got this faculty pass completely free, with zero catch. There were absolutely no strings attached. Joma continued to do his duty. According to the main scenario, his student status made no difference. He just needed to spend the next few years exactly like this. That quiet path would guarantee him the peaceful future he always wanted. But 700 years ago, this very academy looked completely different. During the First Great War between humans and demons, things were brutal. The legendary hero Wakan Valor knew they had to train future warriors. So he founded this academy to teach the most vital combat disciplines. This history is on the exams. Students must memorize every detail. Predictably, Joma was already drifting off to sleep during the dry lecture. Honestly, who could blame him for dozing off during a dry history lesson? He already knew about the founding hero, Wakan Valor, whose portrait hung in every hall. Wakan had fought the Demon King's right-hand man. That powerful general was Lycan, the ruthless commander of the First Legion. Their bloody war raged off and on for 20 years. In the end, Wakan emerged victorious, but the conflict cost him his arm. Unable to fight on the front lines anymore, he could only hear screams. It was an exhausting war of attrition, with absolutely no clear victors. Eventually, both battered forces decided to call a temporary truce. Main battle, it was during this exact time that the hero Wakan founded this academy to train future generations of elite warriors. That first massive war between humans and demons ended. In a historic pact between both sides, this peaceful era has lasted for 700 years now. No one knows if another war will break out in the present day. Honestly, a modern war would be completely unpredictable and way more bloody, but right now, the students definitely did not want to think about war. After all, they had 700 years of peace. Joma was likely the only one there who actually knew about the coming rift. Everyone else had grown used to this carefree, peaceful life. Joma truly wanted to warn the dean about the future, but he had no clue what kind of chaos that might cause. Director Media was already openly talking about stepping down from her post as soon as possible, but people often say things like that without meaning them. Still, Media was the very first person to sense that something was deeply wrong. After all, she was one of the 7 great heroes who stood up to defend students back when Joma was a chef playing the game. He never actually finished it, but he still knew her ultimate fate. She would be the Demon King's first victim. Joma remembered skimming through the story back then just to see what would happen to some of those heroes. Naturally, it is always tough to lose your favorite characters, and now Joma knew that the director was going to be murdered soon. Perhaps things would be simpler if he did not have this knowledge. While trying to survive as a student, the class instructor wished them all the absolute best of luck studying for their upcoming midterms in a few weeks. The very second the lecture ended, students started rushing out of the lecture hall. Clearly, something exciting was happening outside. Joma watched his classmates with sudden interest. Everyone was heading out to see something incredibly unusual. Joma took a closer look and realized exactly who it was. He quickly checked his calendar. Sure enough, it was set for today. A massive crowd of students gathered, eagerly discussing which class he would join. Most likely, he would end up in the prestigious stars class. Joma slipped into the crowd knowing that history was about to be made. Today was May 5th, the exact day the legendary new transfer student would enroll. This was the game's actual main character, destined to blow everyone away on day 1. His name was Leon van Reinhardt. He was the absolute star of the show, every girl's dream and the ultimate envy of every guy. The 700 years of peace were about to shatter, and let me tell you, this guy was a complete jerk. His face was a walking anime cliché, but the players absolutely fell for him right away. There was massive money to be made off his popularity. If this game had been rated for adults, Leon would have been taken out long before fighting the Demon King. Every single female character in the game was practically throwing herself at him. There was the Saint's spear-wielding niece named Rachel, the Saint's daughter with a bow named Saki Ryode, and the absolute prettiest girl in the whole academy, the sword-wielding granddaughter of the Emperor, the incomparable Abel von Nibelung. His personal fan club was basically a small army. Impressive and of course highly annoying, but 3 years later, the blessed protagonist himself, Leon van Reinhardt, would be among the first drafted into the military. Left alone with his thoughts, Kang Joma admitted he was glad Leon would end up in hell, but Joma himself refused to be dragged back there a second time. Looking closely, Joaquin Valor was only able to defeat the First Legion commander. It was hard to imagine just how powerful the Demon King actually was. Was this a story where the main character loses in the end? Leon was talking to a girl who was beaming with happiness, completely gushing as she spoke, explaining how much she admired him. But then Leon suddenly turned around and stared directly at Joma, as if he had sensed the boy's gaze. On him, Joma suddenly remembered they were discussing the game. Blessing of miracles, meaning the hero would handle everything perfectly. Well, on his own, Leon had the face of a guy who screamed trustworthiness. You could trust him. Even Joma was ready to believe it. It was already late in the evening, but the lights in the academy training hall were still shining. Joma continued to train diligently with his wooden sword. The young man was satisfied. His main assumption had finally been confirmed. If he used a weapon that did not meet standard requirements, the blessing of the sword god would not manifest. Joma aimed to master a baseline level of fencing, spending every evening practicing in the hall. As he was heading back from practice, Chloe approached him, wanting to know what she had done wrong. He could have told her he almost lost his head, but they had to study together, so why make things any worse? Joma knew he absolutely had to play nice. Making enemies was the last thing he wanted, so he told Chloe that everything was totally fine. Chloe let out a massive sigh of relief, saying she was glad to hear it, but Joma still could not understand. This girl, she had gripped her sword so tightly, even when knocked unconscious, it felt like the blade itself was begging for help. If she was capable of murder, she was far deadlier than those brothers. But right now, she just seemed like a peaceful, incredibly lonely girl. Chloe invited Joma to dinner again to thank him for everything he had done. He stared at that pleading puppy dog gaze, even though he remembered all too well their last meal nearly killed him. Refusing was definitely going to be awkward, but his gut screamed a massive warning. If he agreed, he might wake up inside a freezer the next morning. But just then a brilliant alternative popped into his head. Joma turned to Chloe, suggesting a favor instead of dinner. He explained that in this specific matter, she was the only person he could rely on. Hearing this, Chloe practically beamed with joy, asking what he needed. Putting his doubts aside, Joma gathered his courage and finally asked Chloe to teach him fencing, knowing he desperately needed to master the sword. Lately, he spent every single evening researching fencing online. He knew that to survive, he needed to absorb plenty of information. Finally, the time had come for their very first lesson. Chloe was absolutely thrilled, greeting her student with pure tenderness and care. Joma felt a little awkward, though. He mumbled a quick greeting, saying he just arrived. Chloe beamed because she had also just got there, even though she had actually waited for hours. They had agreed on a different time, but it was clear that this love-struck girl lived in her own little world. For the first time, Joma saw her out of her school uniform. Her physique pleasantly surprised him. Chloe had a killer six-pack and incredibly toned muscles. It explained her insane strength. Joma handed her a wooden practice sword just like his own. Chloe stared at the wooden stick, completely surprised. She thought they would be sparring with real steel. Hearing that made Joma instantly panic. This was just a practice session, after all, and to prevent real injuries, they had to stick to wood. This was not a death match. Chloe looked at the wooden weapon in her hands, quietly realizing how incredibly kind Joma actually was. He simply did not want to hurt her. Chloe swung the stick a couple of times. Joma realized this girl was monstrously strong. Holding that wooden sword, she literally sliced through the air. He realized that even with practice weapons, he had to be extremely careful. He checked his stats to make sure the sword's blessing was still inactive. The stats looked normal and his height remained unchanged. He knew the blessing usually scaled with his skill level. The guy racked his brain for any trick to speed this up, but nothing came to mind. He did not even know how much stronger he had to get before the mysterious question marks would finally reveal his hidden stats. Meanwhile, Chloe noticed her student looking troubled and gently asked what was bothering him. Joma explained he was just reviewing his system screen. Of course, players could only see their own interfaces, which was why Chloe thought he was just blankly staring into space. The young man begged his teacher to go easy on him for their first session. Soon, all the awkward chit-chat was over. Joma braced himself to begin. Teacher and student stood face to face, tightly gripping their wooden training swords. In his past life, Joma had always been a practical man. As they say, seeing is believing. To truly master any craft, simply putting in hours is not enough. You must be ready to sacrifice your entire body for the goal. That was a lesson Joma learned at the academy. Up until now, his entire arsenal came from that brutal, relentless training. His palms were slick with sweat, his stance was completely unsteady. But fencing is all about one thing: delivering precise strikes. Joma did not even have a second to process the situation before Chloe lunged. She was blindingly fast, launching her attack. Crack wooden steel slammed his shoulder, pure pain. Shot through him, he had literally just asked her to go easy. Joma swung his wooden sword with both hands, desperately preparing to strike back, but his body suddenly froze. He could not move a single muscle. Joma brings his wooden sword down, barely blocking a heavy strike before prepping his next move. But before he can counter, Khlo is already moving to launch her next strike. She strikes even faster, and Joma barely managed to dodge her blade. Her speed has completely changed. Joma realizes that her last blow was just a simple test. That first hit was just a warm-up. Now they rain savage blows on each other. Their wooden swords collide rapidly, clanging together in a constant, brutal rhythm. Joma realizes she has no intention of stopping. He barely manages to keep up. He struggles to block, knowing if a single strike gets past his guard, he dies. He cannot counter. Suddenly, his wooden sword snaps apart. Khlo apologizes, explaining that she tried to hold back. But she failed. Suddenly, she notices a change in Joma. The broken stump of the wooden sword in his hands vibrates violently. It turns out the hidden requirements have been met, pulling the trigger. Even with a broken weapon, his adjustment initiates. His humanity level plummets. In battle, the sword god blessing activates. Joma no longer looks like the gentle, ordinary guy everyone knew moments ago. The system calculations and hidden alterations rapidly reflect in player status screens. This drop in humanity can only mean one thing. Joma is transforming into a cold, ruthless killing machine right now. Suddenly, Joma sees a flash of his past reality as Chef Kim. Looking around, the man finds himself in a kitchen. Was everything just a dream? A fresh fish lies on the cutting board. Kim must work. Arrayed before him are several knives. He eyes the heavy Chinese cleaver. It has collected dust, but he cannot seem to use it. The situation is bizarre. Chef Kim can only wield the sashimi knife. Yet reaching for it shoots agonizing pain through his hands. But the instant his blade touches the fish, the pain vanishes. Relief washes over him, bringing a fleeting surge of inspiration. Suddenly, he feels invisible threads pulling at his limbs. Forced to cooperate, they will construct a masterpiece together. Back in the fight, Joma prepares his blade to slice. Khlo stares in pure shock, wondering if he is sane. She calls his name repeatedly, but he seems completely detached from reality. There is no reaction. He is completely gone. In a flash, Khlo has to throw up her guard. Joma closes the gap in the blink of an eye, striking hard. She screams at him to stop, unable to control this pressure. Joma unleashes a heavy strike, sending Khlo flying across the room. The impact is terrifyingly strong. With real metal, she would be dead. She struggles up, realizing she is facing a different person. Only moments ago, this guy was helpless in their duel. Joma refuses to give her room and launches another offensive. Khlo barely dodges his swipe. His eyes glow with cold light. He looks less like human and more like a weapon. Her balance is shattered, her limbs feeling heavy as she faces doom. There was no clue why he suddenly changed, but this fight had to end. She desperately screamed his name, begging him to stop. But Joma did not hear her. He just lunged forward again, eyes completely blank. Khlo stood frozen, too battered from before to dodge. Meanwhile, inside Joma's head, Chef Kim was finally starting to wake up a bit. Nothing made sense. Why on earth was the fish on his cutting board dodging? It was a bizarre sight he had never witnessed before in his entire life. It was incredibly annoying. He had to slice this stupid thing right now. Wait, the fish was actually trying to speak. It kept muttering the word kanj. Kim stared at his reflection in the knife, realizing his real name was Kenjoma. Instantly, the trance broke. Joma snapped back to reality, looking totally lost. Like an academy student suddenly staring at a knife and a cutting board. In the real world, Khlo was trembling, desperately calling out his name. She begged him to wake up, terrified of what he might do next. Joma grabbed Khlo, The poor girl shut her eyes, bracing for the worst. But at the very last second, Joma stopped. He held Khlo tight by her waist. Staring into her eyes, he softly suggested they finally call it a day. Honestly, he looked completely exhausted, and Khlo was still deeply worried about him. Yet the guy simply thanked her for the practice session and waved his hand. He muttered goodbye and calmly walked away, leaving her utterly speechless. Still in total shock, Khlo slowly walked home. Her mind raced, comparing Joma's performance during the entrance test to today. The difference was absolutely staggering. A completely different picture was starting to form. It felt like Joma became a totally different person during combat. Or maybe some dark, hidden force was waking up inside his soul. No mere technique, just pure, unbridled instinct. His legendary blessing was clearly manifesting on its own, completely uncontrolled. Even unprepared, she stood absolutely no chance against this raw power. And they were only practicing with simple wooden sticks, not real swords. Honestly, it is terrifying to think how this would have ended with real weapons. Before she could spiral further, a cold voice interrupted her from the shadows. A tall figure stepped forward, mocking her for looking so incredibly thrilled. This was her older brother, Nox Auditor, who was a year ahead of her. To say their reunion was warm would be a massive understatement. Nox had been keeping tabs on her since she joined the academy. He immediately sneered at her, accusing her of hanging out with total academy trash. Khlo immediately snapped back, "Do not talk about Joma like that, he is my friend." Nox just smirked. Now he finally had a name for this worthless loser. If she kept associating with him, their family would take care of it. That meant Joma would be eliminated. Deep down, Khlo knew he wasn't joking. She could not afford any mistakes. Her family's grand destiny came first. Without answering his threat, she simply warned him about one crucial detail. No matter who the family sent, none of them could ever defeat Joma. Nox stared at her in silence. He already had the name he wanted. That boy's name is Joma, and he has to explain this bizarre new power. This was not some divine gift nor a blessing. No, it felt more like a curse. To stop relying on this terrifying gift from the sword god, the young man had to search for a new weapon, yet this power mocked and relentlessly pursued him. Eventually taking complete control of his body, strangely, he felt no pain this time. On the contrary, the young man realized all agony was completely gone, only intense feelings of pleasure and sweet exhaustion washed over him. The curse pulled his strings like an invisible thread, whispering dark temptations. It told him to cut deeper and destroy everything. Joma slowly surrendered his entire body to this force, but just then Khlo's desperate scream shattered the air. He heard his name and instantly remembered. Inside that cry, the scattered fragments of his world finally came back together, snapping right into place. It was because of this that Joma finally managed to cast aside the heavy training sword, which had clung to his hand like a second skin. For a few seconds he felt as though his very identity might slip away forever. Just recently, Yander tried to kill him, but Khlo herself had somehow managed to drag him back to reality. Even though she was the reason he ended up in this chaotic state, he still felt deeply grateful to her. Joma decided to ignore what had just happened, but quickly ran away to avoid another sudden activation of the sword god's overwhelming blessing. But could he keep running like this for his entire life? Talk about a nightmare. The sword god's gift was actually a cursed talent. Showing up when one sacrifices their own life, Joma felt like an outsider thrown into a strange world where he would eventually have to weaponize these dark new skills. Joma did not expect much from this place. He only wanted a quiet, normal life. He had truly hoped he could handle whatever difficult challenges came his way. But now he was heading back to his room, completely changed by the ordeal. Only now did Joma truly begin to understand the changes happening deep within him. Something was actively fighting to seize control of his mind, and this newfound strength was certainly no gift. It was a dark curse waiting to consume his very soul. Joma knew this was a formidable divine power, but it was completely chaotic. He had no idea how to handle his new, dangerous abilities. 3 whole days had passed since that fateful evening when Joma first discovered his curse. Currently, Khlo was talking to a classmate who was recommending some cool new spot he loved. She politely agreed to check it out sometime, but in reality, Khlo was deeply worried. Her thoughts were stuck on the training hall. Joma had been absent from class for 3 long days now. Khlo stared at the empty desk where her friend usually sat, realizing she did not even have his phone number. She simply could not understand why she had never asked. Seriously, how did she miss that? Khlo visited his dorm room multiple times, but each visit only rewarded her with a heavy, painful moaning. Worried the boy might get angry, she fought with all her strength to resist the temptation to kick his door down. In the end, she had no choice but to turn back and leave, yet she knew how much she loved watching Joma. In class, especially when he rested his chin on his hand, she could not even count how many times she glanced his way, always terrified of coming on too strong. She always spoke to him with extreme caution. Initially, she blamed it all on that stranger, the one who stood up for her during the placement exam, but deep down, those were just excuses. Chloe terribly missed Kanjma. Meanwhile, another gray, boring day dragged on. At the lectern, instructor Lee Wanbin stood shouting, urging everyone to be quiet. Elite academy students, he snapped, only knew how to chatter. With the weather turning bad outside, today's practice was cancelled. Instead, they had to self-study. The instructor then noticed something. Kanjma had failed to show up for class once again. This young man never missed school without a serious reason. The teacher could only wait. So instructor Lee Wanbin quickly laid out the details of the assignments and ordered them to begin training right away. Suddenly, the auditorium door swung wide. Talk about pure audacity. The instructor could not believe someone actually dared to barge in right mid-class. However, the young man showed zero fear, calmly walking down the steps of the auditorium. Right before their eyes stood Kanjma, completely alive and well. Except a striking streak of gray now ran through his dark hair. He politely bowed to the teacher and offered an apology. Instructor Lee Wanbin stood frozen in pure shock before letting him take a seat. The class stared at Kanjma with intense curiosity. Everyone noticed he looked different. To be completely honest, he had somehow gotten even more handsome. The quiet gossiping wouldn't stop, and the entire room could only talk about Kanjma. This was his worst nightmare, since he hated drawing attention to himself. The moment the recess bell rang, students quickly headed out to grab some lunch in the cafeteria. Chloe, feeling incredibly shy and nervous about upsetting him, quietly approached Kanjma's desk. She softly asked what had happened, but he calmly reassured her that everything was completely fine. Chloe just could not let it go. He had vanished for several days, leaving her sick with worry. She suspected his sudden disappearance had something to do with training. But Kanjma looked up at the girl and repeated that he was perfectly fine. He had just felt a bit sick, adding that he truly appreciated her sweet concern. Chloe stood there utterly stunned. Not only was he not acting cold, but he actually answered her and even thanked her. Kanjma saw the deep disbelief in her eyes. Honestly, her doubts were totally justified. For the past 3 days, he had been dealing with brutal, agonizing withdrawal symptoms that pushed his mind to the absolute limit. Locked inside his room, he could not even swallow food. He just lay there, begging for the violent shaking to finally stop wrecking his body. This was the terrible price for wielding that broken weapon. That price turned out to be astronomical, bringing a pain far worse than any agonizing torture he had ever felt before. But that was not the worst of it. Looking into the mirror, Kanjma realized that while his physique remained unchanged, his face looked completely different, and streaks of his hair had bleached white. He knew this was his punishment. He had to endure every single drop of it and grow stronger. At the same time, Kanjma knew Chloe was probably blaming herself. After all, she was his last rival. Yoma needed to fix this immediately. He turned to Khlo, reminding her of that dinner invitation she once offered. If she was free tonight, he would accept. Khlo froze in utter shock. First one shock, then another. Was he actually serious about this dinner? Of course she was free, but Yoma warned her she had to do the cooking. Khlo practically jumped with joy. She promised to do her absolute best. Perfect. Yoma saw his plan worked. She was instantly back in high spirits. He did not have to worry about her getting depressed anymore. Not at all. Her focus shifted entirely to the kitchen. A massive feast was already brewing. She eagerly asked what he liked. Yoma requested fish. It had been too long. He almost accidentally let slip that he threw up after their previous dinner. But he quickly covered it up. Seafood was just way too expensive anyway. He claimed he could never afford it. Right then, he felt an icy chill. Someone was watching him. He kept talking, but his senses spiked to maximum alert. The heavy gaze was unmistakable. Even K.H. Lo felt the sudden, dark pressure. She turned toward the tension. What on earth was going on here? At the end of the long hallway stood Nox, glaring directly at them. K.H. Lo instantly remembered the brutal warning her brother had given her before. Yoma figured she knew this creepy stranger. He quietly asked her who he was. She kept quiet, terrified that her family drama would ruin everything. But Yoma felt zero fear. He walked straight toward the intimidating stranger. The two boys now stood face to face. Yoma boldly confronted the quiet stranger directly. He told the guy to speak up if he wanted something, rather than standing there. Creepy, silent staring was just plain rude, but the stranger said absolutely nothing. His glare was like a wild beast. Yoma immediately caught that deadly look. Those demonic eyes were intense. Yoma had no idea what was happening. Suddenly, K.H. Lo rushed over, stepping between them. She begged Yoma to ignore him. She snapped at her brother, telling him to back off since they were done. Yoma was completely shocked, so this creepy guy was actually her brother. He could tell that although she tried to sound tough, her voice trembled. She was terrified. Nox spoke directly into his sister's mind with deep disgust. He mocked her for deliberately befriending someone who breaks every single rule. K.H. Lo shot back, telling her brother that her life was none of his business. She claimed the auditors had no control over her, but Nox just laughed. He reminded her that her own hands were already stained deep in blood. Born into a family of auditors, she would always remain one of them. Yoma listened to their intense argument, noting their bizarre ways of speaking. He just hoped they would not start a massive brawl right here. Nox ordered her to dump this loser and return to her noble family. But K.H. Lo completely lost her temper, shouting at him to shut his mouth. She defended Yoma fiercely, their heated screams echoing loudly down the corridor. The intense shouting match made Yoma realize peace was just a fantasy. All he wanted was a simple meal, but drama kept finding him. He was getting used to the chaos, but that name suddenly caught his attention. The Auditor Clan. He finally started recalling who these people actually were. They are the Auditors, a secret faction appearing halfway through the game, specializing in stealth and deadly assassinations, a detail previously revealed to players. The Auditors were weaker than rival hero houses in direct combat, but in stealthy ambushes they were completely unmatched. From childhood, their kids endure brutal, grueling training to become the ultimate tools of death, and every single member of this bloodline is lethally strong. It turns out K.H. Lo belongs to this deadly clan too, which explains her explosive power and short temper, but her father was a total psychopath and her brother Nox would murder anyone without a second thought. You could see that killer instinct in his eyes. It makes sense though. Since the auditors exist to purge internal threats, Kanjoma was already in a dark spot where he would have to kill soon, so he could not judge them. As for K.H. Lo, this girl desperately wanted to live a normal, peaceful life. Yet just like Kanjoma's sword blessing, her birthright is a heavy chain that will never let her go free. A killer's path is always cruel and bloody. Kanjoma was no hero and had zero interest. Becoming one, he could not save the world, but he could protect this one girl. Kanjoma pushed K.H. Lo back, wanting to speak with Nox directly. He was entirely sure of himself now. There was no denying it. Even if his power was a curse, it would never let him lose. Kanjoma stepped toward Nox, asking for his name, knowing there was no escaping his fate. Running away was simply impossible. Besides, a certain old saying crossed his mind. Wherever you go, there is no paradise, so searching for a haven was useless. If running away was out of the question, taking the fight to them was much better. Kanjoma approached the siblings, introducing himself as Kanjay, telling them to follow his lead. Kanjoma claimed he was a master swordsman, warning them not to lag behind. Meanwhile, Lee Wonbin sat in the faculty lounge, lost in deep reflection, unable to forget his most mysterious and strange student. The teacher sensed a profound shift had occurred within Kanjoma. His expression had altered entirely, looking as if every emotion had been drained from his soul. Suddenly, the lounge door swung wide open, and a female instructor walked inside. She greeted Lee Wonbin, but his mind was far too preoccupied to notice, completely ignoring her lighthearted teasing about his hair. It was obvious his thoughts were elsewhere. Right on cue, the desk phone rang. Lee Wonbin picked up the receiver, answering calmly, but the incoming message absolutely shocked him. The colleague watching his reaction instantly knew something was terribly wrong, deciding it was best to leave him completely alone right now. Li Wanbin was stunned to hear that someone had just initiated a subspace clash. The report confirmed Kanjoma initiated the challenge and his chosen opponent. Accepting the battle was Nox's auditor. The combat arena was quickly prepared, and the deadly match between Nox and Kanjoma was set to unfold. The young master sat quietly inside the preparation room with 15 minutes left on the clock. Kanjoma originally assumed preparing the arena would take ages, but the process was incredibly swift. Soon, Academy Director Medea appeared, delivering a serious warning to the boy, reminding him of the sheer danger of facing an elite assassin. He had to be pretty careful. Everyone knew this fight would take place outside their current reality, meaning no physical wounds, though mental scars were still possible. Nobody could rule out emotional trauma, so his only option was to fight for a win. Right then, Joma could hear the roaring crowd from inside the locker room. Watching a good fight was always entertaining, but this wild reaction was way more than he expected. He had only himself to blame here. He wanted to keep a low profile, but things had completely spun out. Now he was stuck. Chloe sat right beside him, crying her eyes out. The poor girl clearly felt like the upcoming fight was entirely her fault, so Joma quickly reassured the crying girl that she was not to blame for any of this. He even pointed out he had borrowed her weapon, so everything would be fine. That helped Chloe calm down a bit, but she still knew her brother was a monster. She could foresee a brutal end to this duel, absolutely brutal. Joma tried saying she was pretty strong too, but she knew Nox was a monster. He was a prodigy who inherited monstrous power. At only 14 years old, he had no equal. They even called him the pinnacle of night techniques. Honestly, who came up with such silly titles anyway? Looking back, Joma realized his life had always been like this. No matter how hard he tried to keep his head down, trouble always found him. He always got dragged into these dramatic confrontations anyway. Years ago, his very first teacher, a professional chef, told him he was destined to hold a blade for his entire life. Nobody could have guessed back then that even in another world, Joma would still be wielding a sashimi knife. Suddenly, the subspace arena began to manifest, and the fighters were called forward. Joma told Chloe he would be right back, leaving her to wait behind. Right as he reached the door, Joma paused and called out to her. He needed to give her some peace of mind. He gently reminded Chloe that this world is packed with geniuses, so facing one is nothing to fear. It does not have to end in tragedy. Besides, she should always remember that everyone is a genius in their own unique way. Chloe looked up, clinging to a tiny shred of hope as he walked out toward the duel. She had no idea how this would play out, but Joma offered one last wave. He promised her that no matter how many geniuses exist, he would win. Joma stepped onto the battlefield, feeling like a gladiator from ancient Rome. The scorching sun beat down on him. The massive stands were absolutely packed. Students from every class had gathered together, shouting at the top of their lungs. It had been ages since the academy saw a clash like this. Get ready. Everyone wanted to see a spectacular showdown. Joma stood there in the center. He was stunned. He did not realize this was treated so seriously. Every single student was taking this dead seriously, scanning the crowd. His eyes locked onto the elite section. The academy's top class sat there, watching like hawks. Right in the middle was Abel von Nylong, sitting alongside the game's actual protagonist. Joma did not like this one bit. Their presence brought nothing but unwanted pressure. Why were they even here? Seriously, did these high-tier elites really have nothing better to do? Nox's auditor glared at his opponent with pure hatred, convinced this young challenger was mocking him. He believed this kid had nothing better to do than mock a proud, hereditary assassin. Clearly, the kid couldn't tell the difference between actual courage and foolish arrogance. Imagine choosing to brandish such laughable weapons in a real battle. Meanwhile, Joma stood right before his opponent, casually holding 2 kitchen knives in his hands, completely confident. He calmly challenged Nox to try and survive their opening exchange. Joma declared that true professional warriors don't blame their defeat on bad weapons. Naturally, this completely set Nox off, and he promised to cut out the insolent tongue of his arrogant opponent. Meanwhile, Joma quickly assessed his opponent's stats, realizing Nox was indeed formidable. The senior wielded 2 swords and wore one of the highest-level defensive spells, Raven Armor. Joma sensed this right away and planned his moves using this vital information. He was dead serious now, In one hand, he gripped his trusted sashimi knife, and in the other, the special rose dagger from Kh. Finally, the duelists stood facing each other, preparing for the clash. Suddenly, the subspace system announced that the duel was officially open, and all eyes in the room instantly locked onto them. The signal flashed, the subspace system announced the hero's blessing, and the battle began. Joma immediately triggered his painless blessing. In an instant, he activated the blessing of the sword god. The clash had officially begun, and the powerful blessings of divine entities were fully active in the arena. Watching closely, the students were utterly captivated. They had never witnessed anything so intense. The crowd tried not to blink, desperate to keep up with the lightning-fast actions, but nobody could make sense of what was actually happening. Everything moved at a blinding speed. It started like a standard duel, but now it looked entirely different. To the untrained eye, it seemed as if several vibrant bolts of colorful lightning were constantly colliding, crashing together and splitting apart in flashes. Even the senior spectators admitted both fighters were insanely fast. The match was getting Abel Vanabelong realized just how wrong she had been about him. This seemingly weak student she once sat with on a bench at night was proving to be an exceptionally skilled warrior. On the field, you could barely make out their movements. Both fighters traded devastating strikes and lightning-fast parries. Nox unleashed a flurry of deadly, sweeping slashes with his dual blades. If his target had been an ordinary person, the duel would have ended right there. But Joma was incredibly fast, and even Nox realized his elusive target was dodging almost every single strike. Frustrated, the senior unleashed his signature three-legged bird technique, a lethal move fully intended to execute his annoying challenger on the spot. Nox fully expected to see nothing left of the fresh schoolboy, yet if you could watch a slow-motion replay, you'd see how Joma casually slipped completely out of harm's way, leaving Nox to realize with growing horror that his attack had failed completely. Joma showed absolutely no motion, continuing his work with cold, clinical precision. The stunned spectators in the stands watched in sheer disbelief. A mere freshman was easily evading an elite upperclassman's best efforts. Sure, the sophomore possessed massive power, but underestimating this particular freshman was a fatal mistake. Meanwhile, Abel had a completely. But Kh. saw things differently. Watching the fight closely, the truth suddenly became clear. Sure, the sophomore was throwing devastating strikes, but they weren't landing. Joma casually deflected every single blow. Honestly, it looked like he wasn't even trying. Nox finally realized Kh. was right. This low-tier freshman was far from simple. It was pretty obvious now. Joma was executing a highly advanced defensive technique. No wonder he survived those heavy blows. Nox knew his opponent was incredibly quick. To deal with a target this fast, he had to play it much smarter. So he prepped a massive, wide-range skill, but there was one major distraction. Every time Nox glared at the freshman's cheap weapon, his blood boiled with rage. A basic kitchen knife, how could he lose to that? Just then, Joma tossed a knife aside, a move that made no sense. Maybe dual wielding slowed him down, or maybe it was a silent, brutal insult to Nox. Joma firmly gripped the remaining kitchen knife, the rose-patterned one he borrowed. He held Kh.'s weapon with both hands. This whole matchup looked completely ridiculous. It was so bizarre, it didn't even feel like a real fight anymore. Nox watched the kid, totally unable to predict how this lunatic would strike next. He was a seasoned killer. He wasn't going to make any stupid mistakes. Instead, Nox decided to end the freshman right now with one massive attack. Nobody could survive his signature Crimson Blade, and he had the track record to prove it. As one of the top hunters, he was ready to show the power of true bloodline. Then the unthinkable happened. Nox caught a fleeting glimpse of a cheap blade. The rose-painted knife flashed right past his face. See, Joma only wanted a normal life. He just wanted to lay low, be ordinary, and live quiet days without any drama. But when trouble forces your hand, running isn't an option anymore. You have to fight. Backed by the sword god's ultimate blessing, he was ready. Watch this. Joma executed one single, blindingly fast slash. Honestly, that was more than enough. Nox's hand flew clean off. He barely even realized it happened. Absolutely nobody saw the attack. Joma had rushed past him like a ghost. The shocked spectators in the stands couldn't even believe their own eyes. Nox froze in place, completely stunned by what had just occurred. He had every reason to be. Joma's peaceful school days were officially over. His severed arm fell to the ground. There was no hiding this power. One more blow, the match was over as Nox's head flew off. It was over, the virtual subspace instantly shut down the simulation. Smoke and dust filled the arena, then the air slowly cleared. The crowd saw Joma sheathing his knife while Nox collapsed, gasping for air. The duel was declared finished. The audience stared in complete, breathless silence. No cheers, they were simply too shocked to even process the outcome. Joma looked down at his borrowed rose-patterned weapon, completely surprised by his own success. He had just beaten a dual-wielding elite with a common kitchen tool. At least it happened inside a safe subspace duel. Nobody was actually killed. Still, it was mind-blowing. Nox was definitely not some weak fighter. K.H. Lowe was right about Nox. Joma could sense his massive, battle-hardened experience. Still, with a brutal personality like that, Nox would never be popular. The final match statistics slowly lit up on the massive scoreboard. The official winner was declared, a first-year from the Tiger class named Kang Joma. In the stands, the shocked crowd couldn't stop buzzing about the freshman's absurd power. Beat Nox huge, Joma was suddenly the most talked-about guy around. Too late to change it now. What is done is done. Joma chose this path himself, relying entirely on his own fury to survive. He only cared about himself, but now he had to survive the sudden spotlight. By the next morning, the academy halls were completely alive with gossip. Nobody could get over that fight, it was just too unreal. They whispered about an auditor losing, and everyone knows how terrifying that clan is. Suddenly, a completely unknown freshman became the only name anyone cared about. Kang Joma was on everyone's lips, even Abel sat there completely dazed. Yesterday's brutal clash kept playing on a loop inside her head. Now she had a name for the guy everyone was obsessing over. And honestly, who could blame them? That ending was absolutely mind-blowing. A severed hand lying on the cold dirt is hard to forget. Even Abel had to admit she couldn't tear her eyes away. It felt like a fever dream, especially since he used kitchen knives. Just two ordinary blades, how could anyone be that terrifyingly strong with those? As the swordmaster's granddaughter, Abel took massive pride in her own weapon skills. She genuinely believed she knew everything there was to know about blades. Turns out she was dead wrong, and that memory on the bench stung. She vividly recalled sitting on a bench next to Joma, desperate to learn his name. She wanted to find this genius and absolutely smash him into the dirt. At the time, she honestly thought Joma looked pathetic and weak. She even recalled her grand family motto about being kind to the helpless. She had practically begged her grandfather for the top student's identity. But suddenly, every single puzzle piece clicked together in her mind. Abel froze as she realized the truth. Joma was the one who surpassed her. An instant, suffocating wave of pure embarrassment and fury washed over her. She must have looked like a total joke back in the park, and she knew it. Joma was probably laughing his head off at her. Just then, Rachel jumped awake. A sudden scream from Abel had startled her friend right out of sleep. But Abel wasn't about to confess how incredibly stupid she'd been. Feeling Rachel's sharp, questioning stare, she scrambled to make an excuse. She stammered about missing a few practice sessions, claiming she was just tense. But fooling a lifelong friend is basically impossible. Rachel knew her too well. Abel's explosive rage was written in bold letters all over her face. This was definitely not about some minor, everyday training slump. Even though Abel stubbornly denied it, Rachel started making wild guesses. First, she wondered if her friend was just incredibly hangry. Maybe she left her precious sword at home or desperately needed the bathroom. After running through every absurd scenario, Rachel hit the ultimate guess. She triumphantly assumed Abel must have secretly scored a boyfriend. Rachel was absolutely thrilled. Finally, Abel was acting like a normal human. No longer a cold combat machine, now she just needed the guy's name. Rachel already imagined how they would giggle and gossip about every juicy detail together. But Abel stayed silent. Clearly, this mysterious new guy was someone special. He was clearly a big deal if his identity was kept so hidden. Rachel assumed her friend meant Leon, the charismatic and incredibly handsome star. But Rachel was pretty sharp. She put the pieces together. She realized this guy must be that famous new transfer student. The legendary freshman who had captured the hearts of the entire academy. To Rachel, it made sense. A handsome guy deserved the spotlight. Abel realized she had to leave immediately. She was not going to discuss him. But she could not lie to Rachel either. Walking away, though, was impossible. Getting away was impossible. Rachel was on a brand new mission. Determined to find him, Rachel snatched her friend Abel by the hand. She dragged her along, announcing they were heading straight to the elite tiger class. When the two most popular senior girls suddenly showed up there, it was a total shock, a bolt from the blue. The students gaped in absolute shock. Nobody knew how to react. The academy idols were standing right at their classroom door. Abel tried pulling her back, but Rachel was already in full hunter mode. She marched right inside and stood confidently on the very top step. That spot gave her a perfect view to hunt down their dark-haired star. Rachel even climbed onto a desk to survey the entire room. She scanned the entire room, desperate to spot Jioma among the crowd. A student complained, saying it was pretty rude to step on someone's desk. But Rachel just winked at him. Hey, gorgeous girls get a pass, right? Abel cringed, realizing she had to drag her wild friend out immediately. This embarrassing scene was about to get much, much worse. Just then Rachel spotted her target. She locked eyes with Jioma. Noticed the girl sitting right next to him, who was clearly head over heels. A little competition did not deter Rachel, it only made it fun. In 2 quick leaps, the beautiful girl approached the exhausted boy. He was slumped over his desk, and Chloe immediately put up her guard. Jioma painfully lifted his head. He was utterly drained after his intense battle. He could barely keep his eyes open, but what he saw completely stunned him. A gorgeous upperclassman was leaning over his desk, smiling sweetly right at him. Rachel introduced herself, thrilled to finally meet the legendary freshman in person. She watched him fight yesterday, and Jioma was trying to process what she wanted. As she checked him out, Rachel decided this guy was actually pretty handsome. But there was no time. Someone else suddenly intervened. A powerful hand suddenly clamped down tightly on her wrist. Chloe grabbed her. Chloe held Rachel back, demanding to know who she was. Jioma watched them and realized that the terrifying danger he just felt was coming straight from Chloe. She looked like a completely different person, no longer sweet or shy. She looked like a bloodthirsty monster, holding a sharp cutter knife in her hand. Jioma could already see it, a complete bloodbath in the classroom. This chaotic turn of events certainly was not in the original game. Abel turned to her friend, trying her best to drag her away from the rival classroom. But Rachel had absolutely no intention of leaving, claiming they only came by to say hello. Harmless play. Rachel then patted Khlo on the head with a condescending smirk. She told the little girl not to butt in when grown-up ladies were talking. Besides, a heavy knife is absolutely no toy for kids, and she should put it away. Her fury flared instantly. Finally, Rachel let go of the girl. She dismissed the kid, turning right back to Joma to carry on their chat. Suddenly, a sharp cry of die rang out as a box cutter sliced the air. The sudden flash of violence drew everyone's eyes. Nearby classmates assumed some red juice had just spilled. But everything was covered in red. Rachel held Khlo's hand tightly. The knife dropped to Rachel. Everything seemed to move very slowly. This little girl was not just short, but sluggish too. Abel realized her companion might actually cause harm and tried to stop her. But with a casual flick of her wrist, Rachel tossed Khlo aside. Without even looking, she sent Khlo flying clear across the classroom. Yet the young girl braced herself and landed cleanly on her feet. Absolutely furious, she refused to back down. The watching boys were loving this. Talk about drama. We are about to witness a showdown between two beauties. She belonged to the famous clan of overwhelming strength, born with insane power. Their motto was simple: no skills are needed against overwhelming strength. Naturally, Rachel possessed absolute confidence in her own power. She walked up to Joma and asked if the little girl was his girlfriend. Joma quickly denied it, which instantly eased the heavy tension. Still, Rachel demanded to know exactly who this Khlo girl was. Joma answered simply that she was just a regular friend of his. Honestly, the poor guy had absolutely no idea what was actually going on here. He was still weak from his prior battle, struggling to process this mess. It was highly unusual to see elite, upper-class girls down here. Noticing Abel was present, Joma turned serious and asked why they wanted him. Rachel teased that he had caught Abel's interest, so they came to visit. Abel blushed furiously at this, loudly declaring it was completely false. She insisted that Rachel had dragged her along entirely against her will. But Rachel shot back, arguing that Abel secretly wanted to come anyway. Abel realized how incredibly ridiculous this whole argument made them look. They resembled a couple of love-struck fools in front of everyone. The rest of the class basically grabbed their popcorn, waiting for the drama to unfold. Everyone wanted to see if a massive catfight was about to break out. Abel tried to clarify that this was all just a big misunderstanding. Joma sighed, telling them they should probably just turn around and leave. His head was pounding, and he really did not feel well at all. This random girl drama was the last thing he wanted to deal with. He bluntly told the pretty visitors to mind their own business. Such bluntness shocked the crowd, as these girls were never ignored like this. But Rachel found his confidence highly amusing, noting he was exactly her type. Joma had zero interest in getting close to Rachel, wishing she would just go away. But Rachel kept staring with intense curiosity, teasingly telling him not to be mad. She even invited him over to watch a movie after class. This made Khlo snap. She exploded in rage, screaming at Rachel to stay away from her man. Rachel scoffed that he did not belong to her. Joma quickly agreed they were just friends. Rachel wanted to push further, but her powerful friend Abel was radiating pure anger. Abel was practically boiling over, coldly demanding they shut up and leave immediately. Rachel had no choice but to listen. Smiling, she announced that unfortunately she must go. Still, she was glad to meet them and promised they would definitely meet again. Never again, Joma silently hoped those annoying girls would stay far away. It sounded pretty harsh, but he had zero time to waste on stupid women's squabbles. Finally, Abel dragged the smitten Rachel away, even though she was completely in love. Joma did not even watch them leave, just wanting his quiet life back instantly. Khlo watched her beloved Joma silently, who had once again rested his head to sleep. He drifted back to sleep. Khlo vowed to be more protective now. She resolved to guard Joma's peaceful rest. Meanwhile, Rachel walked back to her office thinking. Rachel thought about how fascinating everything was. Joma had stayed entirely calm the whole time. His calm behavior made perfect sense, but something deeper was definitely going on here. If you looked closely, a strange, dark mystery seemed to emanate from his eyes. When Joma got angry, his intense gaze felt like it could literally pierce your skin. Rachel felt that power keenly. Joma was nothing like those pathetic academy blowhards. And honestly, who does not love finding a dangerous mystery in a quiet guy? For decades, her powerful clan had only allowed marriages with truly outstanding, legendary warriors. So she was incredibly pleased that Joma was actually quite handsome and strong. Marrying him would actually be quite fun, not a chore. He was worthy. He was completely worthy of deep attention, even from the unapproachable Empress Abel von Nibelung. Rachel offered a lazy apology, but Abel believed she owed Joma's class an apology. Still, Rachel was not actually sorry. She would never apologize for her exciting behavior. She whispered to Abel that she simply could not give Joma up. She needed him. Meanwhile, Knox walked down the quiet hospital corridor, tightly clutching his heavy IV stand. One single thought echoed endlessly inside his head: I will kill him. In his entire life, Knox had never suffered such a completely devastating, humiliating defeat. After all, he was a proud, highly respected member of the great Auditor's legendary clan. You can bet things are about to get incredibly bloody once night falls. Knox paced restlessly, not knowing if he should launch his final attack right now. When he ran into another patient, Knox violently shoved him aside without even looking back. He wanted to gather his entire clan to help him behead that insolent brat. After Joma was dead, Knox would surely claim Khlo because she was a dangerous beauty. She was incredibly strong, maybe even more dangerous than him, a perfect warrior match. He planned to use the clan's secret night techniques to end Joma for good. The furious young man cracked open his hospital ward door and froze in complete shock. He had an unexpected visitor. Joma sat fully clothed in front of the bed. He was quietly holding an apple. Joma actually had not slept a wink last night. Instead, he spent the quiet hours worrying about Khlo, who seemed so deeply exhausted lately. Dark circles lined her eyes, and Joma feared she was genuinely mad at him. She had just pulled a knife right in the middle of class, a major rule break. Khlo was absolutely seething, desperately trying to prove to everyone she was still in control. Right now, she was plotting revenge against the insolent girl who dared touch her Joma. The sheer anger completely consumed her, sending her dark thoughts spiraling out of control. Honestly, she looked ready to end Rachel right then. Talk about terrifying. Joma called out to her. He just wanted her to drop the blade before things got completely out of hand. Staggering forward to break the ice, Joma approached Khlo with caution. He gently asked how she was holding up and how her brother Nox was doing. Khlo muttered that Nox had been admitted straight to the Academy hospital, shocking him. He should be perfectly fine, since their subspace duel prevented any physical injuries. Khlo admitted she had not visited him, yet to learn more. Even though Nox seemed completely fine on the outside, he still ended up hospitalized. She tried to shrug it off, insisting her brother would be fine and not to worry. But Joma knew better. A mental defeat can be far worse than physical damage. Nox's fragile mind simply broke. He couldn't handle the crushing defeat. A broken psyche always seeks ugly revenge, and Joma knew a storm was brewing. Joma gently patted Khlo's head to soothe her, then asked for Nox's room number. That is how the two fierce rivals crossed paths at the hospital late that night. Joma casually claimed he was just visiting for a late-night snack. Seeing the lavish private suite and gourmet fruit baskets, Joma realized Nox was incredibly wealthy. Clearly, the auditor's family was swimming in cash, showing off their high status. Nox was absolutely furious, shocked that this arrogant bastard dared barge into his room. But then Joma slowly reached for the sharp knife resting on the bedside table. Nox panicked, instantly believing the intruder had come to finish him off for good. Instead, the uninvited guest just pulled up a chair and calmly sat down. He silently began peeling an apple, leaving Nox staring in utter bewilderment. The guy was incredibly precise with the blade, handling it with flawless skill. He placed the peeled apple on a plate, wished Nox a speedy recovery, and left. Nox boiled with rage, the audacity of this man to mock his strength. Zero respect, he waltzed in, acted like he owned the place, and left. Stopping in the doorway, Joma warned him to drop any thoughts of retaliation. He fixed a cold glare on Nox, telling him to back off immediately. Do that and I will destroy your entire family clan. And get this, Nox recoiled in absolute shock at the plate. The peeled apple had somehow been sliced into perfectly neat, even wedges. It was an impossible stunt. Walking away, Joma knew his psychological trap worked. Just one slight threat, and the guy was completely paralyzed with fear. The auditors are a deadly force, too massive to fight head-on all at once. Especially when Joma could only hold a real weapon for 30 seconds. Of course, in those short 30 seconds, he could easily slaughter a dozen elite guards. But he knew that kind of bloodbath must remain his absolute last resort. Looking up at the cold moon, he felt a familiar chill, like facing a blizzard. The young warrior realized right then that peaceful days were officially behind him. Endless conflict, constant schemes, and pure hatred would now define his daily life. Despite the chaos, he was ready to face whatever storms came his way. Joma was finally proving his worth. It was a clear sign of his progress. The Nox auditor was no longer a threat, so he could temporarily forget about him. However, a new headache was already looming, a girl Joma wanted absolutely nothing to do with. He knew that Rachel would always stick close to the story's main protagonist. Yet in the game, Abel still ended up with her anyway. Meanwhile, Joma remembered that his upcoming midterm exams were right around the corner, forcing him to study hard. Girls and their drama would have to wait. Joma pulled out his phone and checked the exam rewards, totally worth it. He was eyeing the legendary Murasame sword, a weapon that would change everything. With it, he could finally stay in the fight for longer than 30 seconds, making preparation absolutely crucial. No matter your class, the exam format was simple. 5 students would battle. They fought using magic, where individual skills mattered. Still, it was a team battle because trust was everything in this world. In war, trust and teamwork were absolutely indispensable. Joma, though, hated working with anyone, but a strong team was still crucial. But if they formed a solid team, they could easily wipe out any monster in their path. The main threat was a terrifying sea monster he remembered from the game. Just seeing that gross, half-human, half-fish thing in real life was deeply unsettling. It was nauseating. Next up, a mermaid. At least she might be a bit easier on the eyes than that fish. But her rank was still a mystery, and mermaids were actual demons. These entities were so immensely powerful that standard monsters looked like total rookies compared to them. Luckily, and thank goodness for this, students only faced basic monsters. No demons. Joma looked around. He sat on his usual bench, a full month after enrolling. Peaceful. 700 years had passed since humanity and demons signed their historic peace treaty. But papers don't stop conflicts. Minor clashes still flared up. usually triggered by a single renegade demon. His name was Basman. 50 years ago, this rogue 6th Legion commander crossed the border completely alone, boldly declaring to all of humanity his plans for resurrection. He wanted to resurrect their sealed first commander. Basman was ridiculously strong. No barriers or treaties could stop him, forcing humanity to unite their strength. Mankind forgot how to fight, so they sent their absolute best card into the fray. Mankind sent their strongest champion, the hero of the 7 stars, into a brutal week-long clash. Humanity won in the end, but that victory cost them 3 legendary lives. Neither side wanted to repeat that mistake. Chef Kim was deeply concerned, though, because the enemy was just a minor commander. He was only from the 6th Legion, yet he caused so much devastation. Still, that peace held up until now, allowing Joma to live comfortably in this quiet world. But as he sat in this tranquility, some things just did not add up. How did a single hero like Valor Yukon seal the mighty Riken alone? Maybe Valor Yukon wasn't even human. It was the only logical explanation, and they only had 3 years left before war. Demons capable of destroying the world, Joma had to prepare immediately. He could not repeat past mistakes, even if planning with the Academy right now changed nothing. To stop the coming catastrophe, he had to take things step by step. No choice, he had to start with the upcoming exams, despite his frustration. But first, Joma needed allies. That was a pretty big problem since he had 0 friends. He paused to think, then remembered he was actually one of the Academy's most famous students. Leveraging that massive reputation would make putting together a decent team incredibly easy. A powerhouse squad meant he could survive peacefully for the next 3 years. First things first, he had to focus entirely on preparing for the upcoming midterms. Writing in his diary, Joma decided to alter his current strategy entirely. Forget a quiet life, he was going to make some serious noise instead. A week quickly went by, yet Joma felt like he was living in a total vacuum. Completely isolated, not a single soul spoke to him, making it feel like a sick joke. No one offered him a spot. Joma realized his method of gaining fame was too aggressive. Honestly, can you blame them? His extreme methods left absolutely everyone completely terrified. The other guys assumed he was a complete psychopath who was impossible to work with. They were simply too scared to approach him, and that was the reality. Looking around the room, Joma realized he wasn't the only outcast here. Chloe was sitting by herself, totally ignored by everyone else in the class. A total pariah, Chloe stood completely alone until Joma walked straight over to her. He asked if she had found an exam group yet. Chloe looked up at her idol. She admitted she was still on her own, which quite surprised Joma. Though normally popular, Chloe insisted she was doing fine regardless of her situation. Having Joma near was enough. Joma then suggested they team up together. They could search for 3 more teammates together, which absolutely thrilled Chloe. She agreed instantly. Chloe had absolutely 0 doubts about their combined strength. If the exam required hunting monsters, Joma only needed 30 seconds with his knife. Working together, they would easily slay well over 100 monsters. Just as she was celebrating, the classroom door suddenly flew open. Rachel marched right in, loudly announcing she was just looking for some fun. Claiming she wasn't there to fight, she only wanted to have a friendly chat. Chloe gripped her utility knife, ready to eliminate the uninvited guest. Annoyed, Joma snapped that he was busy and told Rachel to get lost. No time, Joma was incredibly annoyed by her constant, highly irritating games. Being called a bunny especially grated on his nerves, but Rachel refused to yield. The girl always got her way, completely ignoring his obvious displeasure. Instead of walking out, she casually laid down right on a desk. Pure nonsense, she playfully claimed her ears were bad and she couldn't hear him. Switching topics instantly, she asked if he had chosen a team. Joma was totally exasperated by how this stubborn beauty completely ignored his words. Realizing she wouldn't leave, Joma admitted his team wasn't set yet. That answer was precisely what the mischievous beauty wanted to hear. Smiling broadly, she invited him to join her group for the exam. Joma realized this was actually a perfect opportunity to secure strong allies. After all, Rachel was incredibly powerful and exactly what he needed. Rachel kept pressing him. Using his shyness, she said he could join them just this once. Joma couldn't understand why she had even approached him with this offer. There was probably already a long line of top-class students waiting to join her team. Rachel replied simply, it would be boring with anyone else. But she knew they would have fun with Joma. Joma had to admit that. He'd already joined KH team and couldn't just abandon her, but Rachel was ready to make any compromise, pointing out 2 open spots on her own team. Joma explained that without KH they would not only fail to win the prize, but their entire average score would be at risk. KH might be annoying, but that was no reason to hate her. She would prove herself eventually. With that, the deal was done. Rachel added Joma and KH to the roster. Rachel hoped KH would keep her cool, while Joma asked who their leader was. This detail mattered to him, without even looking up from her phone. Rachel casually mentioned that their main guy was Leon. Everyone knew him. Hearing that name, Joma realized his hopes for a peaceful life were completely shattered. His quiet, unremarkable existence had slipped away yet again. He sat there utterly exhausted. He was furious, wondering what sins he had committed in his past life. For 30 years straight, all he did was slice fish. Now he could not even enjoy this game in peace. He wanted a drama-free life, yet drama kept finding him at every single turn. Still, Joma was now teamed up with actual heroines. Talk about a major shift. He had drawn everyone's eye, and honestly, a small part of him liked it. But reality hits hard, because everything is about to change with Leon van Rehorst. Leon is the actual main character of this game. Joma had no idea how the system would react, but he would have to own this choice. The more he weighed the consequences, the more he wanted a way out. He desperately needed to swap teams, but Rachel had already finalized the paperwork. They were officially locked in. Joma felt a cold sweat breaking out. In fact, this was the first time he wanted to run away so badly. Just then, KH walked over, noticing his pale face, and asked what happened. She tried to play it cool, but she immediately saw his shift in mood. Ever since that blonde girl approached him, Joma had looked incredibly gloomy. Joma admitted he felt uneasy about teaming up with the elite star class. It felt like a recipe for disaster. KH however, immediately tried to reassure him. She was absolutely confident that Joma was much stronger than any of those elites. Hearing her words actually calmed his nerves a bit, bringing him back to reality. Besides, he had joined this team to help KH in the first place. Leaving now would be incredibly irresponsible. Plus, this team was a mixed bag. Not everyone was an elite, so this situation might actually work in his favor. He just needed to stay positive. Joma resolved not to stress out prematurely. Instead, he asked KH when they were supposed to meet up with the others. KH replied that according to the blonde, they were meeting at 6 p.m. At the local cafe. It seemed they already had a nickname for Rachel. Joma relaxed a bit and suggested they head over to the cafe early. It was better to get there ahead of time and prepare for what came next. They gathered at a local cafe, eager to plan their strategy for the upcoming exam. KH was absolutely thrilled, her excitement practically bubbling over. She couldn't wait to meet the academy's elite, while Joma tried to stay calm. He honestly couldn't understand why anyone would pay so much for KH's green sludge. Joma ordered an espresso instead, but that bitter taste definitely not for him. KH loved absolutely everything here, while Joma tried to stay completely indifferent. He forced a straight face, hiding his misery. Espresso was terrible, but it was cheap. Indeed, it was the only drink he could actually afford at this pricey spot. Since the shop was off campus, their student discounts were completely useless. After a few tense minutes, a quick text from Rachel popped up on Joma's phone. He was starting to worry this was all a cruel prank and they would kick him off. But as it turned out, the rest of the team was just running a bit late. They walked in, offering quick apologies for keeping them waiting. Rachel immediately stepped up to make introductions, hoping Joma and KH had not been bored. Joma simply could not take his eyes off the group that had just arrived. He quietly analyzed their faces, trying to read how they felt about his presence. Then he spotted a total stranger in the group, stretching out his shoulders. The guy looked like a complete thug, making Joma instantly on guard. Just as tension built, Leon van Reinhardt broke the silence with a warm smile. He offered a friendly handshake. Joma was shocked by his easygoing attitude. The story's primary protagonist was surprisingly down-to-earth and incredibly polite. Leon mentioned he was incredibly impressed by Joma's massive battle from 2 days ago. He was genuinely happy to welcome Joma onto the team, which was wonderful to hear. Getting praise from the hero himself was a massive confidence boost. Leon suggested they do a quick round of introductions first. He volunteered to go first, naturally taking charge as the leader of the group. Leon was indeed the captain, and he hoped they would all work well together. Joma stared at Leon, quietly cursing how insanely unfair life could be. Can we talk about how unfair that is? Good looks, deep voice, perfect build, he has everything. Rachel spoke next, saying she would skip her own introduction. Since everyone already knew her, she decided to skip that part entirely. Another teammate stood with folded arms, clearly keeping his distance from the others. He bluntly introduced himself as Speed Weapon, adding a strange comment. He apparently liked heroes, even sporting a bold hero tattoo right on his neck. Joma figured the guy was just trying way too hard to look cool. Still, that weird hero remark felt like it had some serious weight behind it. Next was KH Lo, who cheerfully introduced herself as Joma's close classmate. She openly shared how thrilled she was to join this elite squad for the exam. The elite star class students did not react to her greeting at all. Joma did not need a grand introduction either, as his reputation preceded him. He kept it short, simply stating he was in the same class as KH Lo. With the awkward greetings finished, the mood finally began to settle. Now it was time for business. Leon cracked open his laptop. He pulled up a project file, specifically detailing the upcoming exam layout. Apparently, their professor had quietly leaked some crucial data earlier that afternoon. With them, a detailed map of Scopely Island. This is where the exam takes place. Once the exam day arrives, every single participant will be transported to this island. Through a special portal, the subspace is just a gateway, but the location itself is entirely real. Keep that in mind because these academy students would actually get seriously hurt by monster attacks. Leon suggested taking a closer look at the terrain. They needed to discuss their options in deep detail. They got the northeast region of the island, 3 student groups. We'll head out there, each squad must hunt monsters. The top team takes the lead. Everyone looked extremely focused. They all wanted to win. Every single one of them. Leon turned off the projector. Any questions, he asked them about the upcoming exam. Weapon spoke up since it was an island, surely mermaids would be around. And he wanted to know if they were a threat. Leon replied that the instructors would clear the site beforehand. There was no need to worry about them. Chloe then asked if they would fight other contenders on their turf. This test is meant to teach them how to cooperate as a unit. Thus, interteam battles are highly likely. Joma glanced at his girlfriend, knowing she was deeply concerned about the other students and did not want to hurt anyone. With no more questions raised, they decided to wrap up the meeting. Everyone was told to prepare on their own before meeting tomorrow to finalize their actual strategies. They planned to grab a tasty meal together afterward, but Leon stayed behind to pack up. Joma was in no rush either since eating out was something he preferred to avoid. The mood became pretty awkward. Joma realized he needed to walk out before he looked like he was trying to cozy up to the main character. Just as Joma headed for the exit, Leon asked where Joma was from and how he reached the academy. Joma had heard this question before, but this time felt completely different now that people were showing real interest in Joma. He tried to figure out what exactly Leon wanted from him. Maybe he should just share his origin. Yet, if that was all Leon would have asked in front of everyone during their very first meeting. No, he had intentionally waited until they were completely alone to bring it up. Joma realized that this silent pause had stretched on far too long. Leon quickly apologized for bringing up such a sudden, personal matter. Still, the captain admitted he felt a strong connection to Joma. Joma was not sure what to make of this handsome captain. Was he truly just a normal guy, even though Korean was the main language? Here, distinct national identities definitely still existed. Still, it was quite obvious Joma was Korean. Leon suggested just forgetting the whole conversation ever took place. He admitted his question had been rather thoughtless. He turned around and started heading straight for the exit, making it seem the discussion was closed, but on pure instinct, Joma reached out and grabbed Leon on the shoulder, asking where he was from. It came out completely on autopilot. Yet, if Joma had let him leave, Joma wouldn't have slept a wink all night, tormented by doubt. Leon grabbed his hand, smiling sweetly as he claimed to be from Germany. After that, Leon turned around and walked away in silence, leaving Joma staring at his hand. But get this, for a split second, a very strange thought hit him. When Leon had placed his hand on Joma's shoulder, a very strange sensation arose. Could Leon also be from another world? Geoma kept thinking about this constantly, trying to make sense of the bizarre sensation. Of course, he couldn't be entirely sure if he was the only outsider who had ended up in this game. Besides, Leon was the actual protagonist, which gave him a massive advantage. Compared to a minor extra like Geoma, he stared at his sashimi knife, knowing that under the sword god's blessing, his senses always sharpened. The young man decided to test this right now, drawing his sashimi knife. He activated the miracle-grade blessing of the sword god, letting the power flow. The blessing confirmed it. Leon definitely belonged to this virtual game world. But immediately he felt just like last time, that focusing deeply triggered something strange. He could almost perceive a voice, realizing that he was merely someone's helpless puppet. Geoma quickly deactivated the skill, feeling absolutely terrible as he tried to think. His head was starting to throb, and even his usual pain relief blessing was completely useless right now. The version of Leon he had encountered today was the exact same protagonist he remembered from the game he used to play. An ordinary extra would have acted differently under the circumstances, but today at the cafe, that blonde guy had asked about his nationality and said something strange. Dropping a cryptic line about them being alike, Geoma checked the internet to search for any information about Leon, but there was absolutely nothing on the web. Geoma hit a dead end, so he decided to stop searching there. It was highly unlikely he would ever see Leon again after the exam. If they crossed paths down the road, he would deal with it then. He recalled how the academy principal had greeted him, saying it had been a while. They acted as if they already knew each other, but Geoma decided not to overcomplicate things right now because he needed to keep a clear head. Perhaps all this confusion was just due to the blessing's influence. Checking his stats, he noticed that several of his attributes had increased. Unfortunately, his spirit and weapon levels remained exactly the same as before. So he needed to keep training, thanks to physical exercise. His physical stats had improved, though weapons were still in short supply. But if they passed the exam and Geoma received the Murasame's sword, things could change. His status window still showed one hidden parameter, while his overall adaptation level had also increased quite significantly. If he analyzed everything Geoma had done up to this very point, having only fought his brother and sister in the lecture hall, perhaps his stats were related to that. In the end, Geoma was left completely confused. It was too complicated to understand, with absolutely nobody to ask. At least there was some good news to salvage the situation. It seemed his blessing of painlessness had increased, now lasting 40 seconds. Geoma finally sheathed his knife, deciding the massive headache had been worth it. But it was definitely not in vain. The grueling training paid off, and his stats rose. Time quickly slipped away. Soon, the final countdown officially began. Every single day, the team gathered together in their room to discuss battle strategies and training. Constant debating, brutal physical training, they pushed their limits. They also carved out time for practice sparring. These mock battles sharpened their skills, and finally, the stressful day of their midterms arrived. Nerves ran high, and Kangyoma instantly noticed a strange gate. The portal leading to the subspace looked completely different from their standard training combat arena. Either way, the entire team stood fully focused with weapons drawn. Rachel pointed out that while Kangyoma was normally always on time, today he was very late. In their setup, Rachel took the crucial role of main damage dealer. Team Captain Leon stood dead center, while the quiet young man Walpin acted as their defender. For now, the mysterious guy remained a dark horse. Keep your eyes on him. Khlo took the secondary dealer slot, completely prepared and eagerly awaiting the start of this exam. Meanwhile, Kangyoma himself took up his position at the very back as their rear-guard defender. Arriving late, he apologized and carefully inspected everyone's weapons. His interest was piqued. Rachel was holding a powerful S-class spear. It radiated immense power, but Captain Leon, oddly enough, did not hold his legendary Bamong sword. Instead of his iconic blade, he carried some kind of lightweight training sword. The quiet young Walpin surprised everyone, as his weapon of choice was nothing but a flute. Knowing how silly it looked, he snapped aggressively at anyone asking questions. Rachel whispered that despite looking like a silly toy, it was extremely valuable. Specifically, that unique item was actually one of the few S-class healing tools in this game. In the actual game, pulling such a rare weapon required spending a fortune. But if the healing effects are so strong, why design it like a strange musical instrument? Curious, Kang Yoma stepped closer to get a better look at the instrument. This immediately annoyed Walpin, who was already sick and tired of being teased by the team. There was no telling how far their heated argument would have escalated. Fortunately, the overhead speakers crackled to life, calling the first-year cadets to prepare. Midterm began. Every single student stood instantly locked in tight. Instructor Lee Bin addressed the crowd, keeping his rules incredibly brief. He reminded them that if the situation ever gets too dangerous, they must run away immediately. After all, they are still just learning and are not actual heroes yet. There was absolutely no reason for them to risk their lives over basic school grade scores. In addition, anyone who got hurt had to contact the nearby healer. Turning to his squad, Captain Leon Reinhardt declared that it was finally time to prepare now. He told them to stop worrying and simply give it their absolute best. The whole team felt a heavy sense of duty, their focus sharpening as they braced themselves. His moment arrived. Today, his true journey officially begins. He was fully determined to take his first major step toward becoming a true legend here. But then, silence. Kang Yoma noticed K.H. Lo standing deep in thought. Although she tried hard to focus on the exam, a bad feeling kept bugging her mind. She remembered hearing rumors about deadly mermaids nesting in this very sector. Kang Yoma quickly reassured her, saying the academy staff would keep them all completely safe from harm. After all, there was zero chance of mermaids showing up here. Even during the exam, K.H. Lo couldn't forget her childhood in Sicily, where people always whispered about terrifying encounters with mermaids and the chaos they bring, right now. Humanity is holding a tense truce with the demons, making dungeons pretty safe from these creatures, yet the old rumors still refuse to die. Mermaids are still incredibly lethal, meaning everyone must always stay on high alert. Soon, Lee Ben and the other academy instructors stood ready, announcing it was time for the students to take their marks. With the subspace gate finally active, Joma stepped up to comfort K.H. Lo. Gently patting her head, he told her they had to move. That simple gesture actually helped her calm down, knowing Joma would be right beside her. With complete trust in him, she watched the other teams step through the portal one by one to begin their dangerous midterm. In the beginning, only absolute darkness greeted them, until distant voices started echoing through the void. Joma's voice was frantically calling out to her as K.H. Lo drifted away. Recognizing his call, the young girl finally snapped back to reality. It turned out the intense dimensional transition had almost knocked her out completely. Safe to say, K.H. Lo realized she had been totally out of it. Suddenly, this exam didn't feel like some simple school training anymore. The stakes were getting way too real, and to make things worse, their communication devices were completely dead. They had zero contact with the outside instructors. Something was seriously wrong with the surrounding space. Flashes of light flickered as the environment warped, leaving everything blurry and distorted. Then out of the deep gloom, a truly grotesque face emerged. Half of its face gleamed in the dim light, revealing bulging, visible blood vessels beneath the skin. Moments later, the hideous creature fully revealed itself. There was absolutely no mistaking what stood right in front of them. These students had only expected a normal school exam, but instead they faced a real mermaid, a terrifying demon far deadlier than any ordinary monster. But to understand how they got here, let's look back. Before the nightmare started, Scapulae Island had actually welcomed them with incredibly beautiful weather. The crystal-clear sea was beautiful, but most of the cadets felt utterly miserable. Passing through the dimensional gate had left them incredibly dizzy and nauseous. Seeing everyone sick, Leon noticed that Joma was perfectly fine. The young swordsman shrugged, explaining that motion sickness never really bothered him. He had crossed dimensions before, and it was always painless. But Leon wasn't just chatting, he was pointing out the sudden guests surrounding them, while the other cadets were busy doubling over in pain. Joma had to step up and handle the incoming sea monsters alone. At first glance, the beast seemed much smaller than he had expected. These half-human and half-fish creatures looked utterly ridiculous on screen. Naturally, Joma felt quite proud to be the first one diving into battle, yet he couldn't help but feel a little silly. Maybe they would encounter fully grown versions at the actual meeting point. Leon confirmed his suspicion, warning him that the monsters ahead were much bigger. But their sheer size wouldn't be the only thing testing their limits. It was actually smarter to target the weaker monsters, saving precious energy for later. After all, those points still added up, so Leon suggested heading toward Chloe's scouting zone. With a clear plan, the entire team began pushing deeper into the mysterious island's forest. Rachel spearheaded the advance, while Joma watched their backs to cover them. Leon suddenly signaled a halt, announcing they had finally reached their destination. Right on cue, Chloe slipped away to scout the surrounding area once more. Within mere seconds, the agile scout swept through the zone and reappeared beside them. Her insane speed left Joma completely speechless as he stared at her in awe. He could barely believe his eyes, seeing her leap effortlessly through the high branches. This high-flying traversal kept her completely silent. Leon immediately asked for her report. He wanted to know if she had spotted any real threats or anything interesting. As it turned out, she had found a dark cave just 500 meters ahead. Soon the team arrived at the cavern opening, nestled right at the mountain's base. An eerie, low rumbling echoed from within. Stepping closer, they peered into the pitch-black abyss. Two glowing spots burned through the shadows, no doubt the eyes of a waiting beast. To their absolute surprise, a whole pack of monsters had gathered deep inside the cavern. Strangely enough, they were warming themselves around a campfire. It looked like a massive horde. At least 50 or 60 beasts huddled inside. Joma immediately began calculating the score. Clearing this entire nest would easily secure them first place in the exam. But rushing in blindly was way too risky. Team safety had to come first. If someone got seriously injured, calling the teachers for help from deep inside would be impossible. Leon was weighing those exact same concerns. The team faced a critical choice. They could either take a massive risk right now or safely retreat to find a much easier target. Back during their prep sessions, the plan was simple. Chloe would handle all the scouting. Meanwhile, Happen, their serious healer, was tasked with keeping everyone alive. Joma had doubts. He found it hard to trust someone so quiet with such an important protective role. Doctors were supposed to be warm and caring, but Happen was incredibly cold and distant. Regardless, Happen firmly believed a true hero must always protect others, so he took his duty very seriously. Leon kept assigning roles. Finally, it was Joma's turn. He placed Joma at the very back of their single-file line to guard their rear escape route. It was pretty obvious that the commander did not trust Joma's combat abilities. Joma forced a calm smile, trying his best not to snap at his leader. He swallowed his pride instead of speaking his mind. Leon confidently declared that he would personally lead the vanguard and guide them forward. If a fight broke out, he would be the first to draw his weapon. But wait, Rachel realized she had not been given a single task yet. She absolutely refused to sit out the action. Leon felt the heavy pressure. Everyone was waiting for his command, but he simply could not find a suitable role. He stayed silent, desperately wanting to keep Rachel far away from any danger. Watching this awkward silence, Joma figured Leon was simply hopelessly in love with her. He was clearly trying to shield his crush from getting hurt in a chaotic melee. Rachel absolutely refused and leaped straight into action. Approaching the dark entrance, she gripped her weapon, winding up with immense force. She unleashed her spear, sending it whistling through the air at blinding speed. It plunged deep into the cavern, slamming directly into the crowded camp of sleeping monsters. The spear plunges into the flames, triggering a massive, deafening explosion. Dozens of beasts fall instantly. Rachel refuses to let them recover. She's locked in, ripping her spear from the dirt. She prepares to strike. Diving forward, she mows down the beasts, slicing off heads in seconds. Right before the exam, Leon had given her some very specific advice. Clear the entire area, leaving absolutely nothing alive in there. Her unique double-bladed spear makes this bloody job incredibly easy to pull off. With sharp edges on both sides, she can effortlessly slice instead of just stabbing. Rachel absolutely loves this challenge, while Wappen prepares his support magic. He plays his flute, unleashing a powerful blessing to heal and bolster the squad. As his allies heal, the beasts weaken under Rachel's terrifying glare. She looks more monstrous than the actual beasts, hacking them apart like a demon. Slaughtering them one by one gets boring fast, so she decides to switch tactics. She triggers a massive spinning strike, cutting down several mutants at once. Mid-battle, Rachel actually pauses to thank Wappen for the protective magic. Honestly, watching her fight is spectacular. Joma can only stare in awe. But Khlo isn't about to let her rival steal all the glory here. Determined to impress, she draws her blade and activates her special cat blessing. The skill grants her insane speed, letting her close the gap and strike instantly. Once Kh-Lo joins the fray, the battlefield becomes a complete pity party for the beasts. The mutants don't even have time to squeal, over in seconds. Together, the two girls clear the cavern, leaving nothing but quiet, empty stone. As the girls meet up, the guys instantly tense up, sensing trouble ahead. Both warriors keep moving forward, showing absolutely no signs of slowing down. Joma knows how deep their rivalry goes, and things are looking pretty dangerous. But then they spot it, the alpha mutant is still alive inside. Instantly, the beast becomes the ultimate prize, a final test between the two. It's a race, both warriors look completely unmatched. They move with blinding speed, making it impossible to say who has the edge. Rachel admits that Kh-Lo has gotten way faster since they first met. Kh-Lo feels insulted by the praise, insisting this target is hers alone. After exchanging sharp glares, they separate. Joma can finally breathe again. That tense face-off felt incredibly dangerous, but the crisis is temporarily avoided. Seeing Joma shake, Leon quietly asks if he was actually that worried. Joma admits his heart was pounding. Meanwhile, the girls tally up their kills. It turns out they slaughtered exactly 60 beasts between the two of them. Leon reassures everyone that there's no reason to stress over the score. Their allies, meaning trust is everything. He then orders the team to move out. Joma can't help but admire Leon's natural leadership and fierce protective drive. He truly cares about keeping every squad member safe. In a team like this, petty rivalry has absolutely no place at all. Joma starts to realize that their earlier conversation meant something much deeper. Maybe it was just about nationality, but doubt lingers. Lost in deep, anxious thought, Joma is suddenly blinded by a massive flash. It hits Leon directly, sending him crashing down completely lifeless. The others stared in absolute disbelief. At first, it looked like a sick joke. Where did all that fresh blood on their commander's body even come from? The cave was supposedly safe. Instead, terror gripped the entire team. They quickly spun around, desperate to see what kind of creature struck him. But as they turned, their absolute worst nightmare stared right back. Looming directly in the middle of the dark cavern, their deepest dread took shape. A massive, twisted creature appeared, looking disturbingly like a legendary mermaid. But a mermaid here made zero sense. The instructors had thoroughly swept the entire island before the exam. The students had no idea how. This beast got here after being promised a completely safe testing ground. It felt like a living nightmare. Joma realized he had let his guard down, thinking earlier that everything was going way too smoothly. Now he had to make a split-second choice. Do they run or fight? Trying to escape while dragging the severely injured Leon was a death sentence. Rachel shouted for Wapon to contact the teachers and warn them about the mermaid, but there was absolutely no signal inside this deep cavern. Joma knew they were starting to panic, but he kept a completely clear head. He quickly took charge, telling Rachel to hold off any other sea monsters. She had to protect their perimeter and fend off any new threats. Wapon needed to use his healing skills to bring Leon back to consciousness. Then Joma turned to Kh-Lo. He had an incredibly crucial task for her. The young girl stood there frozen, her mind filled with old mermaid legends. Joma snapped her out of it, ordering her to run out of the cave to find the teachers. They couldn't escape carrying Leon together. She had to run while the others bought her some valuable time. Getting backup from the academy instructors was their only realistic hope. Kh-Lo desperately worried about Joma's safety, but she knew what was at stake. Swallowing her fear, she stopped arguing and prepared to run. A second later, she dashed toward the exit as fast as she could. With Leon barely holding on, Rachel braced for the oncoming tide of monsters. Shadows swarmed from the depths. She asked Joma for the plan. Wapon was already starting to guess exactly what his friend was thinking. There was no escape anyway, and running would only get them killed. Joma told Wapon to handle the smaller sea beasts. Their only job now was to protect the unconscious Leon at all costs. They were terrified, but honestly, the look on Joma's face was way worse. He had something absolutely insane planned as he stared down the colossal monster. Joma silently thought about how he always hated cleaning small, tiny fish. Slicing up a massive, heavy catch was much more his style. Now was the time to show off his actual specialty. Joma reached back and drew his trusted kitchen knife, eager to start carving up this giant beast. Humans rely on divine blessings in this world, while demons wield dark magic. But because of that magic, Joma cannot fight this thing using conventional physical weapons. The massive difference in their core powers is too vast. A normal human simply stands no chance against this demonic energy. Even with the blessing of the sword god, victory over a demon was never guaranteed. In the game, trying to catch a mage without a fully prepared party was basically impossible. Yoma remembered this perfectly, but how did things even get to this point? Now he had to face a powerful demon completely alone. The situation looked incredibly grim. Words could not even describe how bad it was. There was absolutely no turning back. Escape was 10 minutes away. There was only one real option left. Yoma had to take down this massive, monstrous humanoid fish in just 40 seconds. While his painlessness blessing lasted, he activated the strength of the sword god. He stood ready to carve up this monster like some fresh, high-quality sashimi. Rachel wasted no time either, focused entirely on wiping out the incoming monsters. Swarms emerged from the cave. The girl had finally recovered from her initial shock. Now she was furiously impaling the creatures on her sharp spear. The chaotic battle and her own injury had left her deeply frustrated. She began blindly tearing through the vile fish. Rachel was clearly in emotional distress, barely even thinking about her actions anymore. Wapin watched his friend fight the monsters all on her own. He desperately wanted to help her, but his own energy was completely drained. Healing Leon had pushed him to his absolute limit. The captain's wound was deep. Thankfully, the slash was already slowly closing. Wapin continued to watch his companion. Glancing over at Yoma's duel, it was obvious the guy was incredibly strong. Watch closely, there's not a single trace of fear or hesitation in his eyes. He stood before the demon, perfectly calm and fully confident in his own abilities. Still, anyone could see that Yoma had already broken several of his bones. It was probably time to pull him back and try to escape this cave. The mermaid was an ugly, terrifying beast, but Yoma confidently armed himself. Clutching 2 kitchen knives, he launched a direct assault against the demon. Though to anyone else watching, this reckless charge looked completely hopeless. He knew mermaids relied on water magic, making them deadliest near the waves. But they were still made of flesh and blood, meaning they could be cut. He just needed a direct physical strike. Yoma leaped high into the air. Closing the distance rapidly, he caught the monstrous mermaid completely off guard. His knives carved right through her like any normal enemy, one clean swing. That single strike sliced the massive fish completely in half. Wapin gasped in shock. He almost dropped his flute, seeing the sliced demon drop to the ground. Wapin stood frozen, completely unable to move an inch, while the monster opened its massive jaws to snap him in two, but Yoma intercepted the beast, slicing away several fins from the thrashing demon. Unfortunately, it was immediately clear that these shallow cuts did very little. The beast suffered no real harm and quickly dived back into the water. Retreating to safety, she tried to recover, but Yoma now knew she could be hurt even if predicting her movements in water was tough. He locked his focus entirely on the dark waves, anticipating her next strike. Stealing a quick glance backward, he checked on his companions. Wapin kept playing his flute, though his hands shook from pure terror. Leon was still lying unconscious, though his severe wounds were slowly closing up. Healing, Joma knew he had to step up as their captain and commander, so he smiled at the group, asking how they were doing. Stunned, Wapin stammered that they were doing fine and hanging in there. Joma said he trusted his ally, a real hero, pouring all his strength into saving the injured comrade. It was obvious Wapin had found a true role model, and surely their dynamic was going to shift completely from this day forward. Wapin had always dreamed of being a hero, believing that courage, bravery, sacrificing oneself for others, and turning absolute despair into hope were what mattered most. He joined the top academy for training future heroes. But he had never met anyone who actually had those traits. Joma tried to picture how Wapin would react when meeting such a hero and sharing his admiration. With them, Wapin still hoped to find someone like that in their group, which is exactly why he invited Rachel to join. He was sure Lion was the perfect player, someone who would show them what a real hero looks like. In real life, Joma also believed that Lion would turn out to be a hero, since he was literally the game's protagonist. Even during their prep work for the exam, Wapin had bluntly told Joma that he was nowhere near being a real hero. Although nobody could deny Joma's sheer power, he replied that he would gladly pass on that burden because heroism was just useless nonsense. that brought zero benefits to anyone, but right now. Witnessing this battle, Wappen finally realized who Joma truly was. The vicious demon mermaid ordered her minions to strike. These monsters looked like demonic fish armed with sharp, toothy jaws. Their job was to distract Joma while the mermaid recovered her strength. Joma managed to dodge their attacks, but he felt he was moving way too slow. With every passing second, his dread grew worse. He realized he might have overestimated his own power. The demonic mermaid continued to blast the boy with magic, showing complete disregard for her own body. Joma used his daggers to slash the wall and slip into another area. He was not just trying to escape the chase, but also to draw the danger far away from his allies. Those hostile fish were incredibly fast. They stayed right on his tail, keeping him locked in their sights. It felt like they were completely homing in on him, making Joma look like nothing but a tiny bug struggling to escape a massive beast. Rachel and Wappen watched the fight in absolute horror. They could tell that Joma was struggling. Joma slashed the mermaid once more, giving the kids a glimmer of hope that maybe this was the end, but Wappen knew they had to keep healing Lion because this fight was far from over. Joma realized his attack was too weak. He had only managed to scratch her arm, which was barely enough to slow the mermaid down. The massive demon still looked completely unstoppable, even though one arm was reduced to a bloody stump. Her severed hand thrashed violently around the cave, and for a second it looked like it would deliver the final blow, unleashing an impact that literally shattered the mountain, housing the cavern, sending violent shockwaves that engulfed the entire surrounding area. Blazing flames, the disoriented minion fish lost control and crashed into their mistress at full speed. Nearby teachers and other student teams heard a massive an explosion echoed across the entire island. One of the girls claimed she heard something like a roar and a heavy thud as the sky above the mountain glowed like a flash of lightning, but the next moment, rain started pouring down and the girl realized it was just a storm, simple thunder and lightning. The teacher urged them to quickly drag the injured to safety now that the rain was falling, fully believing the lightning was completely ordinary. The student did not argue with the teacher, accepting that it was just a standard storm, though he felt like an absolute coward. Besides, the missions were already finished, and all they had to do was return to the academy. Back inside the cave, the others were finally waking up as well. Wappen kept playing the flute, continuing to soothe their painful wounds. The mutant fish monsters looked around in shock. Obviously, something big was happening that had totally terrified them. Rachel saw that these mutants were rushing deeper into the tunnels with no desire to fight the humans anymore. Everyone froze, waiting to see what would happen next. It looked like the danger had finally passed and they could just wait for rescue. Yet Ya was highly frustrated with himself. While the painlessness blessing was active, he had not landed one lethal hit, likely because he was constantly distracted by protecting Lion. The monsters did not just flee because the ceiling was caving in. As Joma predicted, things were not that simple. And sudden movement stirred beneath the rocks. Suddenly, that massive, horrifying mermaid leaped at the boys again. Joma shed his jacket and prepared to jump right back into the fight, stripping away any extra weight. He shouted to his friends that he was leaving Wappen and Lion in Rachel's hands. He believed no more small monsters would appear. The others watched Joma, completely stunned. It was hard to believe, but he was taking on that mermaid completely alone. Initially, it looked like absolute madness, but they quickly realized they were indeed witnessing a legendary moment that would go down in history. Rolling up his sleeves, he prepared to focus fully on the clash. He had only 10 seconds remaining, wanting to make every single moment count as the furious mermaid glared at him, shocked that a mere human was daring to stand against her. Joma stood firm, tightly gripping his twin knives as he waited for the monstrous creature to lunge directly at him. Joma raised both of his hands to strike, completely confident that he would not taste defeat this time. Lo was sprinting at full speed to help, ignoring the heavy rain pouring down on the island, desperately repeating to herself to go even faster. Lo refused to stop even for a second to catch her breath, clearing a path with her sword to accelerate her pace. She suddenly felt her legs buckle beneath the absolute exhaustion. Even pushing past her physical limits, she could only shout for assistance, wondering how Joma was holding up right now. If it was already this hard for her, she pictured the confident Joma who sent her to find the instructors. He was truly the strongest person she had ever encountered, yet Joma always maintained that fighting was a massive burden, one he always tried to avoid. Besides, she knew how awful he felt afterward. In a desperate situation, Joma would finally unsheath his knives, and that was. They were in a terrible spot. Now Khlo knew she made the right choice. Leaving her team behind to call for help was hard, but she wished she was much stronger. Then a massive explosion shook the mountain. She rushed forward. It was no storm. She knew instantly that blast came from her team. The fiery blast came right from where her teammates were fighting. Terror gripped her chest. She dreaded to think what had happened to them, especially to Jay. Khlo sprinted through the dense woods even faster, ignoring her deep fatigue. Even with the rain pouring down, she refused to stop or slow. She simply could not afford to fall. Drenched in rain and tears, she sprinted on. She screamed into the storm, desperate to find anyone left alive out here. Nothing. Suddenly, a heavy impact slammed directly into her head. Dazed, Khlo tried to focus. There was definitely something moving ahead. Everything was a total, blurry mess, but she realized these bizarre shapes were not human. Grotesque mutant fish monsters blocked the path. She had to fight them. She had to take them down first. Drawing her sword, she prepared to launch a strike. Too late, a sudden shifting movement made her freeze mid-swing. Standing before her was not a fish monster, but a human girl. Relief washed over Khlo. She had almost sliced a person, but moving at such extreme speed. She could not stop herself. She tumbled forward, shouting out an apology. With a violent thud, Khlo crashed face first into the dirt as her blade slipped away. She lay completely motionless. Nearby, one of the fighters finished his kill. One fighter finished off a fish monster and shouted to ask what had just happened. No clue. She had just appeared and collapsed right in front of them. The group had no idea what to do. Maybe she had gone completely mad from fear. Still, they could not just leave her lying in the dark woods. Suddenly, one classmate spoke up. She knew her. Khlo was no stranger. At that exact moment, Khlo slowly started to wake up, desperately whispering for help. She gasped out a single name, Kangjum, now in the freezing rain. The team stood over her limp body, completely lost on what their next move should be. Meanwhile, Wapin stared at the brutal battle ahead, unable to even blink. He doubted he would ever witness such an incredible fight again. Jay's gaze was cold like a master chef slicing up a fresh fish on a cutting board. He was relentless. Jay stayed one step ahead of his prey at all times. Wapin was absolutely certain he would never erase this scene from his memory. Jay was incredibly fast, which he had already proven during their crazy fight in the subspace. His combat technique was unbelievably precise and blindingly swift. He easily dodged the giant mermaid's strikes, relying entirely on his swordplay. In the next split second, he delivered a massive, devastating slash to his giant enemy. Complete overkill. The sliced-up mermaid began to slide apart. She collapsed, cleanly sliced into perfect segments by his rapid strike. Wapin and Rachel realized they would definitely need a lot of therapy after this ordeal. Even Rachel, with her prestigious background of legendary warriors, had never seen anything like this. But get this, if they survived this exam, they might actually make it through this ridiculously broken exam. It was turning out to be absolutely nothing like the test they expected. Wapin stood completely frozen, his eyes glued to the brutal battle. Rachel nudged her daydreaming companion with her spear. He was completely off guard. Daydreaming here could easily get him killed. Suddenly, a soft blue light glowed deep inside the cavern, catching everyone by surprise. Wapin admitted that he got so swept up watching the fight that he forgot where he was sure the tide had turned and they might survive, but Rachel was realistic. Raw sashimi knives against magic was a losing battle. Sure, Joma had the upper hand for now, but the creature would unleash unavoidable magic that none of them had the strength to survive. Just as she feared, the hideous creature began casting a deadly spell. Refusing to go down, the mermaid unleashed a lethal storm of needles. Every single projectile flew straight toward Joma, leaving him with zero escape routes. Yet he deflected the needles into the rock and dodged with insane speed. The spikes shattered against the stone, desperately trying to evade the volley. Joma raised his kitchen knife, only for it to shatter from the impact. It just could not hold up, but Joma was absolutely furious now. He closed the distance, relentlessly hacking at the horribly mangled demon. The fight devolved into pure chaos as Joma sliced through flesh and scales, carving up the monster. absolutely losing her mind, the mermaid shrieked, unhinging her jaw to blast a massive energy orb straight at him. This attack was meant to vaporize him. Wappen and Rachel watched, completely paralyzed. With fear, all they could do was pray he could somehow dodge. Joma locked his eyes onto the incoming sphere, knowing he had to move. He had no other choice. Suddenly, he found himself standing in serene, clear blue water under a peaceful sky, with nothing to distract him. He scooped some up, staring at the pure water reflecting like a mountain stream. Joma stood over the calm tide when sudden red lightning pierced his body, staining the sky crimson. Joma looked around with quiet curiosity and wonder. It felt like a distant voice was calling out to him, whispering a clear message: cut, you have to cut. Suddenly his long kitchen blade materialized right before him. Back in the cave, the player stands tall, facing down the desperate monster, and delivers the ultimate strike. With one clean strike, he sliced the mermaid in half, breaking her spell. The dust settled, leaving the grotesque demon lying broken on the floor. Joma silently stood over his fallen foe, still in that terrifying, trance-like state. He seemed completely lost in his thoughts. Suddenly, the severed demon began making creepy noises, causing Rachel and Wappen to tense up once more. They watched her warily. Honestly, it was hard to even call this mangled thing a mermaid anymore. Only her head and shoulders were left. Yet the grotesque stump began spinning rapidly like a ball, bouncing wildly. Over the cold stone floor, the demon seemed to have a plan. Of its own, it quickly hopped toward the deep cavern pool and plunged beneath the dark surface, escaping. The crazy duel was finally over. Unbelievably, Joma pulled this off despite being a totally normal, everyday freshman. Wappen and Rachel could only stare in absolute awe. Their fallen friend, honestly, Joma seemed way more intriguing to them than any slain mermaid demon, but once the dust settled, Joma collapsed straight to his knees. Dropping his dagger as he coughed up thick blood, Rachel immediately rushed over to help him while others kept checking on Leon. Meanwhile, Leon slowly began to open his eyes. He was completely drained, but his body showed no visible injuries. Then a sudden noise echoed. For a second, they feared the escaped beasts had returned, but instead, a new group of people stepped into the cave. They looked like academy staff, though it was still hard to tell. In this chaotic state, Wappen could not find any relief in seeing backup arrive. Newcomers stood completely frozen as they took in the brutal scene around them. A teacher quickly spotted Khlo's friend, who was still paralyzed and unable to budge. The sight was horrifying. Rachel desperately cradled a totally exhausted Joe, while bloody remains of the severed mermaid lay scattered near the water. The rescue team was baffled. Under the strict rules of this exam, a high-tier demon-like that had absolutely no business being on this island. Rachel sobbed uncontrollably, her emotions completely spilling over as she held onto Joma, whose heavy eyelids fluttered shut as he totally collapsed against her. Watching them, Abel could not understand why Rachel was clinging so desperately to him. Meanwhile, Leon dragged himself up to politely greet the newly arrived group. Honestly, watching him play the polite host right now is incredibly frustrating. His own teammate is on the brink of death, yet he sticks to protocol. Abel mentioned she had already requested help, but instructors were an hour away. The seniors demanded to know what happened here, but Wappen was not holding back. He flatly called the academy professors a bunch of incompetent slackers. They were supposed to secure the exam island, yet a deadly beast slipped in. Abel could see why they were furious, but she still needed answers. She pressed them for every single detail of the encounter, but Wappen was in no mood to take orders from some bossy student who just arrived. Wappen wanted nothing to do with her, leaving Abel deeply annoyed by his hostile attitude. It was a simple question, yet he was throwing a massive tantrum. Wappen muttered that nobody would believe him anyway, but surprisingly, he finally agreed to talk. He fancied himself quite the storyteller and began to recreate the entire battle with dramatic flair. Once the young man finally finished, Abel asked him to confirm some rather unbelievable points. According to him, the mermaid had appeared out of nowhere, and that Joma had defeated her alone. Wappen nodded. That was pretty much exactly what happened. The absolute rookie had slain a high-ranking demon all on his own. Abel quieted down, remembering her grandfather always saying that every legend contains a tiny grain of truth. It would be foolish to believe every single word. But this absurd tale clearly had some real facts backing it up. After all, Wappen had no reason to lie just to make Joma look good. Still, the claim felt completely absurd. To Abel, it felt like a total lie. She came from the legendary Nibelung lineage, after all. Her ancestor was a direct disciple of Valor Hoken. They were elite warriors. Their name carried immense weight and power, which is why Abel was so. She desperately wanted to be judged only by her own real achievements, not by her. Abel worked tirelessly, honing her talents to earn everything herself. But then Joma appeared, and the sheer gap in their power was undeniable. Seeing this monstrous strength makes Abel doubt her own abilities. Had she actually been painfully average this entire time without even knowing it? Suddenly, cold dread and anxiety begin to consume her entire mind. Shaking off her panic, Abel asks a teammate to watch Joma since Weapon is completely drained. He used up everything saving Leon. Now, Rachel cradles the unconscious boy. Fortunately, Joma is already healing. Looking at him, Abel is struck by a sudden realization. Even on the very edge of death, this kid single-handedly crushed that terrifying mermaid. And he is the exact same age as her. Weapon suddenly speaks up. He asks if anyone contacted the Academy representatives yet. Abel nods. The distress call is out, so now they just have to wait. But Weapon warns that keeping the instructors in the dark might be safer. Why give them the details of what went down on this island? After all, the Academy claimed they fully prepared this place for the exam. Yet nothing about this situation feels remotely normal to Weapon. Sure, it is a massive exam ground, but a mermaid spawning here is bizarre. It is highly alarming. He knows these are just theories for now. But deep down, the young man knows things simply do not add up. Leon quietly listens as Abel points out a terrifying possibility. There is a high-level mole hiding right among the Academy instructors. Weapon hates to make assumptions, but the facts are hard to ignore. Crazy as it sounds, a betrayer in their ranks is entirely possible. Think about it, how else could a demon slip past security so perfectly? They were set up if Joma had not stepped in to carry the fight. Every single one of them would be dead in this dark cave. But the motive makes zero sense for 700 years of human history. Both sides have fought countless wars, both massive and minor. Yet the demons have never dared to interfere with the Academy so openly. Abel realizes this sudden boldness can only mean one thing. An all-out war is coming, seeing her pale face Weapon size. He tells her there is no use stressing over mere guesses. Their wild theories might be totally wrong, and the spy talk is unproven. After all, a security breach like this has never happened before. Leon speaks up, getting them to focus on the immediate problem. They need a unified cover story before the instructors arrive to question them. If they reveal Joma killed a high-tier demon alone, it will put a massive target on his back. Weapon agrees completely. But total silence is not an option either. With so many students badly beaten, they have to explain the damage. Sadly, the group cannot cook up a single believable lie. That is when Abel suggests asking her grandfather, Siegfried. He is the legendary Sword Emperor, a celebrated hero who knows how to handle this. By the next morning, the bright sun rises over the bustling academy rooftops. Everything around him felt incredibly peaceful and calm as Yoma rested in bed near an open window. Outside, birds were singing softly. The young man finally woke up and opened his eyes, quickly realizing he was in a hospital ward. Stretching out his hand, Yoma stared at his fingers, realizing that somehow he had survived. The energy unleashed just a second before the mermaid died was true, terrifying magic. Yoma knew he